Late at night, the mansion was attacked by people with magical creatures who were planning terrible things, while no one in the mansion was prepared for the unexpected attack. An ordinary employee runs away from an attacking mage, while his face shows terrifying fear, and his scream raises the ears of everyone else. As a result, others run after him. A black-robed mage raises his huge sword over his shoulder, mocking his defenseless servant, while his huge magical dogs, spewing blue flames from their mouths, run at full speed to attack. Simple maids and other servants save their lives, running away from the monsters, hearing the servants cry a little later. Right behind him were already magicians and summoned wolves. Continuing to run away from the enemies along the long and winding corridors, the servants began to scream one after another out of fear. Mainly the girls in the group of servants screamed. Then, even more unexpectedly, a girl with dark red hair in a lush burgundy dress appears and orders everyone to remain calm. This girl, Fianetta Aids, who is also the wife of Marquis Aids née Flames, her face expresses anger. All the people who served in the mansion rush away, not paying attention to the noble marquise. Almost knocking her down, Aids is shocked by the behavior of the servants. Because of the crush of the whole crowd, which was formed by servants fleeing from danger, many accidentally collided with Fianetta, pushing her with their elbows. Fianetta is indignant that some servant dared to push his mistress. She does not understand why the hell they do not even pay due attention to her. Immediately, she notices a whole pack of hounds, who have noticed her and are now going to attack her. Rushing on their paws, the girl froze in place from fear. And somewhere nearby, an ordinary servant mutters in panic that the end has come for him because they were attacked while their master was away. He crouched down slightly, bending his knees and covering his ears, hoping not to hear anything. The lady in the scarlet dress looked back at the butler and servants with concern, noticing that they were in great shock and fear. She began to think of a plan of defense. The magicians and magical beasts had already approached her, standing right in front of her and the servants. The young lady realized that the magicians who attacked them had waited for the moment when her husband would not be at home, and the servants would not obey her. Preparing to attack, a huge, ceiling-high, werewolf-like magical dog opens its massive mouth and begins to growl furiously. A dark-robed mage charges forward with his army of magical beasts, drawing his sword from behind his back, looking very measured in his actions. Fianetta tenses up when she sees that they have gone on the attack and understands that she can't even hesitate for a second. Being confused, she tries with all her might to come up with something. She begins to use magic herself so as not to die like a pathetic and worthless cur, because her own conscience does not want to die so pathetically and worthlessly. Magic runes appear on her hands, which create a powerful flame of fire that burns through everything in its path, but the intense heat of the spell, which almost envelops her, does not harm her. The monsters and the magician himself fall under the attack, completely unable to dodge, and are left helplessly burning alive, with only screams of agony and a terrible smell to be heard. Immediately, almost instantly, a bunch of even more magical beasts appear behind them, and there are already a little more magicians than there were initially. Everything continues to burn. The girl realizes that she has nothing left to lose, and it is time to put more magic into the spell than she has ever had to. The butler, noticing this, screams hysterically in an attempt to stop her and refrain from what she had planned because it could seriously harm her or even kill her. Fianetta decides to use a really powerful spell and doesn't even hear what the servant is trying to tell her. She's too fixated on making everything as powerful as possible. Almost immediately, she realizes that she can no longer fully control her magical fire, which makes it increasingly difficult for her to control such power. A huge explosion immediately occurs, causing fragments of the mansion's roof to fly into the sky, which attracts a lot of people. The explosion creates a strong force wave, raising dust. The newly arrived mages are hit by a powerful spell and suffer from being burned alive and stop their attack, because right now their body is completely on fire. The magical creatures next to them die in the same agony, screaming and whining from the unbearable pain that the spell and the fire itself brings them. Fianetta watches all this, falling to her feet from exhaustion around the fragments of stones, not caring about her own safety, because she has no more strength. A moment later, the girl notices that her spell and the subsequent explosion have also set their butler, Crofin, on fire, and she immediately screams his name at him in terrified fear and shame. The girl is overcome with shivers all over her body, which leads to even greater horror, and she can only watch the servant's torment with incredible fear in her eyes. She tries to crawl towards him, not paying attention to her condition and external surroundings, not suspecting the shadow behind her, all trembling from pain and powerlessness. Fionnetta stretches her hand towards the corpse. But a new surprise does not take long to come, and a huge sword pierces her through and through. The lady gasps, feeling a foreign object in her chest falling to the floor. The enemy mage waited for a moment, hiding to attack her from behind, and swung again, raising his sword above her head as she tried to comprehend the situation. Immediately, as if from nowhere, a man with snow-white hair appears, who used a spell no weaker with the intention of attacking the enemy mage, pointing the tip of his sword at him. The attacking magician is immediately pierced by an ice block, and he himself is frozen in it. Not having time to reach Fionnetta, the cold permeates the space. The girl recoils from the frozen criminal, gathering her strength into a fist. On both sides she is enveloped by flames that have not yet died out, on the other side by ice. The man who saved her from the magician, with a tense and worried face, immediately runs up to her and grabs her in his arms, shouting her name incoherently. She says his name pitifully, even though blood is already running down her face from her lips. Surprisingly, she manages to open her eyes, casting a worried look at him. The girl does not understand why her husband has such a sad face, while Grisha himself is trembling in terrible fear from the fear of losing her, which is even worrying him. Grisha and Fionnetta were in a political marriage. In their kingdom of Turd, there are 5 magical houses, and the family of Flames, Fionnetta's father, has fire magic. The Marquis Isa family has wielded ice magic for generations, and has kept its name strong despite all the hardships from its enemies. These 2 families had been enemies for a long time with each generation, but the king of these lands did not like this turn of events at all. From this, he decided to give an order that he wanted to create a political marriage between the families, even despite their long-standing feud. 3 years had passed since the engagement and wedding, but the girl did not have power in her husband's family due to the enmity towards her family, despite everything. Grisha was whispered about behind his back because of his marriage to Fionnetta and, in principle, his connections with the feuding family, but they could do nothing about it. Moreover, he was not only handsome, but also an excellent swordsman. He had an excellent reputation at home after the wedding. He immediately took the place of the head of the house, and his family adored him with all their hearts. Everyone admired him and was happy for him. Despite all the gossip that went around his person and around his wife, everyone loved him too much. But he never paid attention to his young wife, whom he married against his will, and she thought that her husband hated and despised her. That is why the young lady was surprised by all the despair that she heard in Grisha's voice when he held her, dying, and said something indistinctly and excitedly. The guy screams her name in horror and hugs her very tightly, but in the midst of all the chaos, in the midst of the fire that surrounds them, the girl lies limply in his arms and does not move. Fionnetta asks why he is calling her so desperately. Meanwhile, blood is flowing from her mouth, there are cuts on her face, and her eyes are terribly tired. He begs and screams for her not to let his wife die, his face showing great emotion as he holds her in his arms, trying to reach the living corpse. The lady recalls moments from her life and decides to remind him that he did not pay any attention to her at all. Her hand reaches for his face. Grisha begins to cry, and tears flow down his cheeks onto the girl's hands, which were reaching for his face. The young gentleman looks at her with great sadness, not holding back his emotions. The man screams her name again, and the flow of tears only gets bigger. His hope for her magical healing from the hole in her chest is still somehow present. The girl immediately wakes up in bed after thinking that Grisha did not hate her, but then screams without realizing that she was just sleeping. The shock of being in her bed flashes across her face. She realizes that she woke up in her own bed, trying to accept reality. She remembers that this was her old room, where she had to live before she was forced into marriage without her consent. After her nightmare, the girl realized how she herself had died quite recently, and in the arms of her husband, who was holding her in his arms sadly and crying. But there were no wounds on her, although she had clearly been pierced by a sword. Her face expressed surprise. She lightly touched her décolleté, as if checking whether she was dreaming of the absence of a wound. Having examined herself, Fionnetta was about to get up from the large bed, hung with a canopy from all corners. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she supported her back with her hands. She went to the mirror and was very surprised that she had become much younger than she had been before. Fionnetta, looking at her younger reflection in the mirror, the girl was shocked. The maid knocked and entered her mistress's bedroom, opening the door slightly in front of her, and asked her mistress why she had woken up so early. Fionnetta immediately starts walking furiously towards the maid and shouts, asking what she is doing here, pointing her hand at herself, which frightens her servants. Surprised by her mistress's behavior, the young maid begins to stutter from fear, but answers the girl that she is the daughter of the Marquis Flames. Fionnetta is very surprised by this, because now her life is at the stage where she lived in her own house, and the servants treated her with respect and called her their young mistress. The servant says that the wedding of the young lady with a young man from the Ides family is soon planned, and asks to gather strength before the important and solemn day. The reminder from the young maid shocks the young girl, who has just experienced her own death, because it would mean going back in time. Fionnetta says that she is in the prime of life and in a good mood, but nevertheless asks to be left completely alone for a while. The servant, hearing the order from the young lady, immediately faithfully fulfills her duty and obediently bows, leaving her young mistress alone. The girl begins to remember everything that happened to her before she woke up in her old room in her own house. Her thoughts again take her to her inner world. She comes to the understanding that all of this is still very clear in her memory, but being in the prostration of her subconscious, it is still difficult for her to comprehend everything. The young lady remembers how she was attacked by evil magicians and how she was held in the arms of Grisha, who could not hold back his tears and his despair from the loss. She replays in her memory his cries as he called her before she died, meaning that she has returned to her past, her frozen figure resembling a walking corpse. Determined to fix everything, Fionnetta promises herself that she will fix everything and prevent the attack from happening, and will be able to avoid her own death at the hands of her husband. After her awakening of Fionnetta, 2 weeks had already passed, and the sun was shining on the clear blue sky over the capital. It seemed that the warm day promised to be unforgettable. The young lady thinks about marrying the same man for the second time, thinking over all her thoughts and experiences that she could not have foreseen at that time. The date of their wedding had already been set, and the lady could do nothing. But it was beneficial to the other side, although for her it was not something terrible. When it was time to go out, the young maid called her mistress and said that it was time for her to go, to which Fionnetta immediately followed her. The servant decides to ask while she has time and chance whether her mistress is embarrassed by such large-scale changes, to which she hears a negative answer. The young maid says that it is too late to cancel the wedding, out of concern for her mistress, and to remind her that, unfortunately, nothing can be cancelled. Fionnetta does not understand what her maid is talking about because she wants to live in a happy marriage, and her eyes sparkle with joy at the upcoming new life, which will be completely different. The young bride walks along the red carpet in a luxurious dress with a bouquet of white flowers, and all she can think about is that this time everything will be different. Before her eyes is a huge hall and many guests. Candles illuminate the entire huge room, and her groom is already waiting for his beautiful bride. She is met by the gaze of her future husband, which goes straight to the bone, and the man looks at the young lady with determination and calm readiness. The girl herself did not understand what her future husband was really thinking about, based on his facial expression. No matter how much she would always like to understand this without much effort, it was unclear. With the memories she has lived through, she can now be sure of one thing, which would be enough for her, that this man in front of her loves her. Fionnetta goes to Grisha with a smile and incredible joy and thinks that she will definitely survive with him, and everything will be different from what happened before she woke up. Early in the morning, 2 peasants are talking to each other. One worker asks the other if he has heard the latest news that happened just recently. They talk among themselves. One of them tells another working in the field that magical creatures were seen on the border, and he answers that it is a real horror. The worker begins to panic and suggests that this is why the king ordered Mr. Gregory to marry the daughter of the Marquis Flames, and this could be a bad sign. The farmer asks if they are at odds with each other, smiling at all the news from his friend. Despite all his calmness, he leans on his shovel. The kingdom of Turd covers a huge area of land, and within its territory there are 5 large nests of magical creatures, which can be a terrible threat. From generation to generation, 5 great families of wizards tamed the power of magical creatures so that many new wars and losses would not break out, protecting the peace of the kingdom from invaders. Among them, especially capable individuals stood out. Only 2 families of wizards were awarded the title of Marquis. These were Flames and Aides. These families have long possessed the magic of fire and ice, and their friendly relations came to an end, and over time they began to feud with each other. In the wedding hall, at the altar, the young people at their own wedding changed the course of history for both of their families in order to reach at least some kind of truce. But there was a tense atmosphere at their wedding, which Fionnetta had not noticed last time among those present. There was no one who was sincerely happy about their wedding. In the corners of the large hall, all the guests were negative and dissatisfied, which put a lot of pressure on the girl because it was their wedding and she decided to do something. Otherwise, a very sad end awaits her, which the young bride wants to avoid with all her might and change her fate, making it a happy life. The priest announces that the bride Fionnetta is blessed by the Holy Spirit, although he himself looked very confused, but decides to stop his speech. He asks the young bride if she is listening to her, which brings her back from her languid thoughts and makes her remember again that now is her new chance. The girl asks to continue, answering that she is listening to everything, while Grigory, dressed in equally elegant clothes, looks at her with a frowning face. The priest blesses their marriage and asks if they bow hand in hand to go into their family life. His face no longer shows the same indignation, but asks, smiling calmly. As the priest reads the oath, Gregory and Fionnetta vow to lead their family life with each other, hand in hand for life. They are handed a box with beautiful patterns, and in it are already waiting 2 beautiful rings, which sparkled even more in the soft white bedding. The young daughter-in-law extended her hand towards the ring, which lay as if in anticipation, which lay in a very elegant box on her ring finger. There was steadfastness in her eyes, but the girl clearly felt the flame that burned around her and passed through her, although there remained steadfastness on her face. The young bride calmly examined the ring, but immediately afterwards decided to simply take a break and wait for her husband, who was supposed to put the ring on her. The man looked at his ring in the same position in his hands, just as Fionnetta did, although he himself might not have noticed their similarity, even in such a small detail. Unlike his sister-in-law's narrow ring with 3 sharp red stones, this one was double with 1 round blue stone that seemed to give off a cold feeling, which suited him best. The young lady begins to worry about the long wait for her betrothed, and her steadfastness seems to fade away at the same moment when the worries concern her and Grigory's wedding ceremony. The man looks very seriously at his betrothed, and his face finally shows precise confidence and seriousness in his intentions. He puts the ring on the ring finger of his betrothed, gently touching her hand with his wrist, and his hands seem even larger against the background of the gentle and neat hands of the young lady. The ring seemed to start to shine even more, and the newlyweds looked sad, which only fueled the general tension among the guests, who were only looking for reasons for new gossip. The girl kept looking at her ring, which reminded her of her husband's ice magic, but after the ceremony they did not even touch each other, which upsets her greatly. The priest pronounces them husband and wife and ardently wishes them happiness in their marriage, and in the sky, a clear and pure sky illuminates everything through the huge windows of the church. Then a guest suddenly arrives, surprising everyone with his unexpected visit, but his motives are not the same as those of all the other guests, which surprises Fionnetta. A man with blonde hair and luxurious clothes, which emphasizes his nobility, and although his appearance indicates this, his smile and friendliness are different from all the other guests. He smiled at the newlyweds, and on the high collar of his lush shirt glittered a luxurious brooch with a green stone, the color of his eyes, which adorned his handsome face with a kind look. Fionnetta thanks the prince for his warm congratulations, and a smile and a gentle blush appear on her face again. This pleasant surprise made her incredibly happy. The prince himself clearly did not expect such a bright reaction, and was no less surprised than the one for whom he had come just for congratulations. But as soon as this meeting took place, another surprise began. A servant ran up to the 3 of them and asked for forgiveness for interrupting the conversation, that an urgent matter required the prince's attention. The young husband was surprised that his name was also being called. This clarification seemed strange to the head of the Ides house, and his gaze changed just as abruptly. The prince, already with irritation, which he did not even try to hide or appear calm, asks if it is so urgent, since the wedding ceremony has just ended. The servant immediately replies that the personal presence of the current head of the Ides house is necessary, to which the prince reacts with a heavy sigh, whose plans were clearly different from those that have changed. Fionnetta notes that almost nothing changes, and this is upsetting. Despite her desire and efforts to change everything, doubt has settled in her gaze. Memories from a dream. There were rumors about them because they didn't have a wedding night with Grigory. Rumors began to circulate about their union. The girl is not going to be a powerless wife anymore and wants to spend her wedding night also to prevent these terrible rumors. Thinking too seriously about this topic, she blushed from her own thoughts and intentions, slapping her palms across her face. While Fionnetta was flying in the clouds, Grigory said that he would go to the meeting with the prince, since his appearance and presence itself were so necessary. The man is already starting to walk away, but the young lady carefully takes him by the sleeve and looks at him touchingly with dubious intentions. Slightly looking away, Fionnetta asks him to return quickly, and she herself will wait for him until he comes to her, blushing mercilessly. She immediately pulls her hand away from his sleeve, embarrassed by this light but significant touch for her, as if nothing had happened. Grigory, unexpectedly for himself, is pleasantly embarrassed no less than his wife, but this only attracts him more, although he restrains his temper. Without saying anything, the man leaves to do business with the prince, while his bride watches him go, not taking her gaze away for even the shortest second. The submissive pose of the girl with folded hands makes her yearn, but the expectation of the imminent return of her betrothed gives her the strength not to give in to melancholy. The picture changes, as suddenly a completely different voice calls Fionnetta, which again brings the girl to her senses and even alarms and frightens her. She recognizes the voice of her own mother, who came in a very beautiful and large dress, which was decorated with voluminous fur, clearly not cheap. The mother, with a stern expression on her face, says, "Let the betrothed go, and since her daughter is now part of the Aides family, then let her not disgrace the Flame's name." Fionnetta gets scared and tries to say something, but then she hears that she will be buried in the Aides crypt. The cruel lady declares that now her daughter does not belong to the Flame's family, and she should not even think about returning to their family. The girl says that she will be the full mistress of the Aides house without delaying her answer for a second, with complete confidence in her eyes. The mother of the young daughter-in-law orders not to disappoint her, to which the expression on her daughter's face becomes more gloomy and angry. But still, the young lady understands that her mother is too stern a person and no one will take her back. She won't be able to return home, so this time she definitely can't make a mistake, which makes her goal even stronger, and confidence gives her even more strength to change her fate. A carriage, driven by the power of 2 strong horses, through the tall trees of a forest covered with the first fragile snow. Fionnetta, in a warmer pink dress, steps out of the carriage, holding her hands according to etiquette, while all the servants obediently escort her. It's been a few days since moving to Celian Castle, which is the property of Marquis Isa, and he's already wrapped up in the white pajamas of early winter. The maids are discussing something of their own in the distance, while the girl, who has recently moved into her new home, begins a light meal with tea, waiting for her husband. One of the servants began to whisper in the ear of another that their master, but made no effort to ensure that no one except her equally nasty friend heard her gossip. She tells her that the master is delaying his return home because he does not want to see the mistress, which the mistress's maid hears and looks disapprovingly at her colleagues. That Fionnetta. The young lady is ready to almost scream from this, no longer able to contain her anger from their tactlessness, pompous rudeness, and terrible boorishness towards her own mistress. The girl's personal maid immediately said that it seemed that no one was involved in raising servants in the Aidzov household, which upset her greatly. Immediately, 2 bitchy gossips begin to get indignant and say that they should be glad that a girl from the Flames family was accepted into the Aides house. Fionnetta understands that a serious conflict is brewing between the previously opposing houses, which will not forget all their enmity so quickly. Last time she tried to befriend the servants, but it didn't work, and now she won't let them treat her like that. When her husband returns, the girl will immediately take care of this issue and make him respect her as a real mistress of the house. The girl's everyday life went on, while the young bride waited for her chosen one, walking around the vast territory of the Celian Castle, getting used to the new environment. Time dragged on terribly slowly, and the young lady began to explore the castle that had become her new home from the inside. Fionnetta kept waiting and waiting for her betrothed, who had been delayed for an unforgivably long time, which made her sad and lonely, and from this anger and irritation accumulated. It already seemed to her that it was simply impossible to wait that long, because last time he was gone for a long time after being busy with that matter with the prince, and George himself neglected his wife. At that moment, the butler of the Adzov house brings a letter that Mr. George himself sent for Lady Fionnetta, to which the lady immediately orders that this letter be given to her. She reads a letter in which the head of the house speaks of his imminent arrival, which makes the girl very happy and lifts the burden from her fragile shoulders. Last time the girl simply slept through his arrival, but now she intends to wait. Her cheeks turn red from embarrassment at the thought of their first wedding night, and that is why she covers her face with the letter, immersed in her thoughts, and begins to get nervous. The girl is still afraid to spend her first wedding night with her husband, but she still waits in their room. She is ready to fall asleep, but her eyes are closing, but she forbids herself to fall asleep. The young lady had almost fallen asleep, and then the moonbeams began to fall on her. Grigory immediately lies down over Fionnetta, which brings her to her senses, but also surprises her with an unexpected return. Once again, the young lady becomes embarrassed, and her cheeks turn red. Due to her husband's unexpected appearance, she lies down on her side, which stuns Grigory, who is confused by this. The man apologizes for waking her and gets out of bed. Immediately, Fionnetta shouts at him not to leave and to stand in the same place. The young lady runs to her husband and hugs him tightly, pressing herself as close as possible. She thanks him for the hug, and for the fact that her betrothed sat her down on the bed, looking away, unable to cope with embarrassment. The man is about to leave again, but then she suddenly shouts at him, asking where he is going to go right now. Fionnetta grabs his hand and doesn't let him leave so quickly. The girl asks about their first wedding night, which she waited for and did not sleep for. The young lady asks if her chosen one has forgotten about their wedding night. George just looks at her with a serious gaze. The man asks her not to talk nonsense, saying that the young lady does not even hear herself, looking at her with a stern gaze. The girl does not understand such a sharp refusal and why he is so against it, asking about the same thing, in an attempt to find out at least some reason that would explain everything. She says that they are, after all, husband and wife, so it is quite natural that they should spend the night together. But even so, the young gentleman of the house does not pay much attention to such a revelation, to which he hears the cry of his lady with the question, does he not want to tell her something either? The man takes her gently by her sharp but small chin, which immediately changes her facial expression, and she becomes surprised and involved. He immediately puts her on the bed, which was not in the plans of the young lady herself. George leaves and closes the door to the room, while the girl lying on the bed reaches out to him, trying to call her husband back to her. However, he remains standing behind the door, not going anywhere, remaining alone with his thoughts. The young gentleman is still visited by interesting thoughts and reasoning about something of his own, which even makes him change his usual facial expression. Fionnetta wakes up and notices that it is very noisy outside, and the first rays of the sun, which woke her up, illuminate a new room. The maid asks through the door if her mistress has woken up yet, arriving just in time, guessing the moment of her mistress's awakening. The young lady asks what the noise is in the street and what is going on there, and the servant Matilda replies that people are talking about an attack by magical creatures on the Marquise's lands. The maid adds that the master is preparing to pacify them, which immediately brings the girl to her senses, and her face shows alarm and fear for a repetition of the same thing that she had already had to endure. After the wedding night, her situation worsened, and she was increasingly neglected, which will not happen again in the second chance, in which the girl must fix everything. If everything goes the same way, he will mourn her dying again, but Fionnetta does not understand why she was refused on her first wedding night. The girl was already beginning to think that her feminine charms had no effect on him, although such thoughts were immediately cut off so as not to get on her nerves. But then and now, she begins to feel that he doesn't care about her just as much as he did that time, which really hits her determination and faith in her own strength. She immediately slaps herself on both cheeks so that all negative and destructive thoughts quickly leave her head, and she switches to changing her destiny, rather than continuing to self-flagellate. But then the young lady decides that she cannot waste time on such things, so she needs to pull herself together and gather her strength so that her determination will move her further and not fade away so quickly. Although she was saddened by the loss of her first wedding night, she cannot give up, because if she gives up now, she will definitely not change her future, which will again remain filled with grief. In the middle of a snowy clearing in the forest stood knights and maids with their master, who was busy discussing his affairs with one of the trusted knights, while the maids discussed their own questions. Fionnetta screams for her husband to take her along on a magical beast hunt, with complete confidence in herself and the fact that she will now go help her husband and become much closer to him. He only looked at her wearily, not rushing to respond to her ardent offer of help, and only looked at her sullenly, without uttering the slightest word that his bride was so waiting for. The maids began to whisper behind their backs and discuss how something had gone wrong yesterday, which was why the young lady was on edge and even screaming so loudly. But this gossip was unpleasant to others. Georgie only answers her calmly that they can handle everything themselves, and she shouldn't have strained her voice so much at the beginning of the frost so as not to hurt herself. The girl is fiercely trying to convey to her betrothed that she is capable of fighting at the proper level and will go with him no matter what, shouting at him tirelessly. The man only dryly answers her that she is not going anywhere with them, watching her clinging gaze, and moves away, leaving all this awkwardness behind. She looks at him with the same feeling of abandonment and desolation between herself and him, from which she so strove to escape in order to lead them both to a happy life. The knight, who is only ready to agree with his master, says that he did everything right, because why take a wife who doesn't even know how to fight with him on a hunt for such magical creatures? But his master answers him that he who serves him is mistaken, and that his wife would not be a hindrance to them, because she has the strength and skills to fight. This greatly shocks the knight, who is clearly not prepared for everything to turn out this way, and therefore he goes into a stupor from surprise, almost stopping his step. The girl is very disappointed by her next not just failure, but a new disappearance and more gossip about their union, but the coldness from her own husband finally upsets her, and she cannot even think about anything else. The young lady does not understand the reasons for such an attitude towards her from her own betrothed, from whom throughout all this time she had to receive only indifference and a lack of any interest. While the maid Matilda is styling her mistress's lush scarlet hair, she keeps remembering that she failed to fix their first wedding night, and now he won't take her with him on the hike. The young lady ponders why her husband can keep such a distance from her and what she needs to do to get closer to him, almost biting her elbows in irritation. Her memory flashes back to her past image of how, with the help of her fire magic, she had to protect her native lands from magical creatures that attacked villages long before their wedding. Fionnetta comes up with the idea that this could all be due to her incomplete ability to control her fire magic and remembers how she defended her villa near the capital. She wants to improve her ability to handle her magic and spells so that after that she can have at least a small chance to win Grisha's trust, as she began to call him in her thoughts. At this point, the young lady turns to her maid Matilda, calling her to her, already in a calmer frame of mind, to discuss some things with her. The green-haired maid Matilda is one of the 3 servants that her mistress took into the Izov family's home from her own home, and in her mistress' opinion, it was a very good decision. The girl orders to ask the servant if her mistress can go to the library, and the maid Matilda replies that her mistress is already the mistress of this estate, and she does not need to ask permission. She decides to insist that the maid clarify this issue, although she says it not with reproach but with caution, so as not to cause new troubles. The young lady recalls that she used to go to the library without asking anything, because Grisha didn't care, but now her behavior caused a negative reaction from those around her. The maid Matilda said that her mistress could definitely visit the library at any time, and then her mistress called it great news and decided to go with her. The library itself contained huge bookcases filled to the top with books, making any search difficult due to the size of the entire room. But still, the lady, happy with her find, takes out a book with a dark cover, and a victorious smile and delight immediately appear on her face. Magic is magical abilities embedded in the body, and therefore it is very difficult to handle them. There have been many examples of how people who do not know how to do this have harmed others. Fionnetta studied very well and diligently as a child, but when she got older she stopped studying, which she now regrets about the missed opportunity. From such a long break, she has a huge reserve of magic, which means that now she needs to get down to studying as quickly as possible and decides to start on the same day. The girl comes to the head maid Brailfer, who is distracted from her usual daily routine, and meets her mistress with her gaze. Miss Brailfer asks if the lady wanted anything from her, smiling warmly at the young girl who unexpectedly came to her after a long time. They had not had any open or direct conflicts last time either, but this left the young lady unaware of what the head maid thought of her, which made her nervous and created unnecessary difficulties and inconveniences. The girl is going to lure her to her side, but for now she needs to make a good impression, so she asks where she can practice magic. An elderly lady on high, among servants like herself, says that her young mistress can practice magic and spells in the backyard. She also talks about how Mr. Georgie himself used to practice magic there, along with his sister Aisha, but now the young mistress can practice there too. Fionnetta, with a big smile from ear to ear and sincere joy to the point of delight, says that she will go there right now, decorating everything around with her good mood. The girl was serious about returning to her studies, to learn something again and strengthen her abilities that had failed her last time. The butler, in a conversation with the maid Matilda, notes that quite a lot of time has passed since the previous practices of magic, and the power of the fire is not the same as it was before. Matilda still assumes that there is a reason for their mistress's sudden desire to practice magic, and someone could have made her change her mind. Someone was looking at the young lady from the window. The head maid watched her young mistress's practice of magic with a very gloomy and angry expression on her face, which clearly did not please her, but she was not going to show it openly yet. Fionnetta spent several days diligently honing her skills in magic and the ability to control the power of her spells. She concentrated on reducing the amount of magic leaving her body. The fireball in her hands remained at the same level, remaining more constant, which made the girl happy. The young lady could not help but be pleased with her progress. Fionnetta, the maid Matilda, and the butler walked through the castle together. The man, with a questioning look, decides to ask his mistress why they need to wander around the castle and if something is bothering her. The young lady says that she is the mistress and must keep order in the house, immediately hearing the answer that she could do this after Mr. Aiza returned home. After such a remark, her step immediately became more rapid, and the servants only looked at each other with a heavy sigh, although the young lady replied that she had to take care of business without her husband at home. They could barely keep up with their mistress and entered the wilds of a huge castle. Then the girl hears some kind of muttering very close by, which surprises and discourages her. Fionnetta notices two servants drinking during the workday and discussing their personal lives in an inappropriate manner, without thinking about anything else. She suddenly approached them and scared them very much. The mistress of the house asked if they needed to work right now, although she knew perfectly well that this reproach had to be heard. One of the drunken servants begins to justify and soften the situation by saying that they are now on a break. Another one ruins any chance of a better relationship with the cheeky question of whether the servants in the Flames household like to relax a little during their breaks. The servant's mistress notices the alcohol and shouts that she has never seen such insolence. But then the servant asks if she will tell anyone what they drank during the service. Fionnetta says that this is a forced measure of silence, because otherwise the family's reputation will suffer, which will be a worse outcome. The extremely drunk servant, completely forgetting who he was talking to, shouts that Fionnetta, since she comes from the Flames house, has no right to reproach them for anything. The maid Matilda decides to speak out on this matter and only speaks of her contempt for the servants in the Eidzov house, which again become a complete disappointment for her. Bruno says that their master Georgie will find out about everything and will decide for himself the future fate of the two servants who drink alcohol right during the working day. At these words, the two noisy and impudent men become quiet and lose all indignation, realizing what they had just done. Right there, all that remains of them is empty, except for the hostess of the house who came with two people she had checked, which surprises, in a negative sense, even the butler. While Bruno is talking about this situation with the maid Matilda, their mistress begins to talk about the fact that Grisha only recently became the head of the family. After this, the servants began to feel more free and even allowed themselves to drink while working. But this was not only out of disrespect for the new mistress of the house, but also in their new freedom. After all, her husband simply cannot keep track of every person in the house while he travels to the capital or hunts magical creatures. Now the girl will be responsible for organizing the work of the servants and protecting the house on behalf of the head of the family, who is on duty. This time, Fionnetta is not going to let things slide, because last time she delegated all the responsibilities to the butlers, which led to her powerlessness. Maid Emmeline and butler Bruno are ordered to help maintain order in their mistress's castle. The young lady begins to remember everything she experienced that time. She took from her house the most trusted servants, the maids Emmeline and Matilda, and with them the butler Bruno. Over time, they all died one by one, and looking back with a full understanding of what it was like, it seems to her that she betrayed each of them. They all held good positions with her mother, which made their lives more influential than most strangers. Therefore, this becomes the main reason why the girl needs to become a worthy mistress for her servants. After walking just a little way down the corridor, the young lady overhears the gossip of two maids discussing the fact that their master George refused his wife on their wedding night. Fionnetta sees how quickly rumors spread throughout the castle, which really irritates her. One of the gossips says that their master's wife, although charming and beautiful, is a complete fool. The second one starts telling her about another rumor. She tells her about the assumption that the gentleman has a lover. Grisha communicates with his first love, which has been the case since childhood, during the time when all 5 families gathered together. Fionnetta stood at a distance from her mother, still feeling uncomfortable, but she knew that the guy from the Ides family was communicating with his former lover. They had pleasant conversations with each other even after everything, when both were already growing up and maturing over the years. Her name is Neslin, and she is from a side branch of the Ides family, a girl with aquamarine hair and golden eyes. But for the young lady, this is not a reason for grief, because she is absolutely certain that Grigori Ides loved her and shouted for her not to die. But she is troubled by a new question about whether he loves her now, and these doubts already seem much more serious to her. At the moment before her death, he was certainly worried about her, but now, by order of the king, he was married to the daughter of an enemy, which can only be a forced measure for him. She is frightened even by the very thought that Grisha might still love Neslin, but the lady decides to distract herself from all the negative thoughts that only take up extra time for worries. The young lady goes to her room to double-check the things in the closet. Here she looks deep into the shelves to find everything that was there. But suddenly the girl realizes that there are things missing there, and that they can only be with a small number of people with whom she already has the intention of dealing with. The next day, the maids began their daily routine as usual. One of them showed the other an expensive, luxurious piece of jewelry that George had given to his wife. The purple-haired maid says that the mistress of the house does not deserve this, since her husband cannot even fulfill his marital duty and refuses her on their wedding night. This impudent woman, who thinks that she can so easily and with impunity take her mistress's things, gifts from her master and the head of the Ides family himself, considers this a disgrace. Fionnetta arrives with her personal maid Emmeline and asks what the other maids are doing with her things, clearly frightening them with this unexpected appearance. The maid Galeza pretends not to understand anything and acts like a simple fool, although her face showed hidden intent and disrespect, and asks what her mistress is doing here. The young lady says that all the chambers belong to her, so she has permission to be anywhere, and she is well aware of the loss of things. Galeza, with an impudent face, folds his hands together in a mocking pose, saying that their master does not care about anyone and will not side with Fionnetta. At that moment, the maid with a nasty character makes a terrible grimace and tries to set a condition that if her mistress wants to live in peace with them, then she should address them with respect. The young lady immediately realized who she was dealing with, and immediately decided not to treat her softly and to resolve the conflict without violence. The girl asks Emmeline again if she heard what the servant with the incredibly nasty and terrible character and no better long tongue said. Emmeline says with tired eyes that this attitude is very upsetting, which again serves as an even greater disappointment. Fionnetta orders to convey everything that she has just seen, which the trusted maid obediently does. Galeza screams and tries to stop the other maid, which frightens even the lady's friend with a nasty disposition, but Emmeline calmly goes to pass on everything. Immediately, Fionnetta blocks her path with her hand. The maid is already in a terrible panic, afraid that her actions will be found out and punishment will still follow, and she wants to immediately prevent this. But the young lady thinks to solve everything differently and says that it was not in vain that she studied magic again, which only frightens Galeza more. The young head of the house threatens to test the results of his training on them, lighting a fireball in his hand, which illuminates the entire room and begins to draw a pattern of the spell. Immediately, Fionnetta pointed her hand with a burning flame at the two maids, who began to back away, while Galeza, without stopping for a second, continued to scream. The maid said that her mistress was simply bluffing and would not even lay a finger on them because they would not forgive her for such behavior towards her subjects with pompous confidence. The young lady says that this house is hers, but the stubborn Galeza continues to not shut up and says that the master does not love her and will not take her side. Even in response to this terrible rudeness from her subordinate, the girl continues to calmly conduct the conversation and replies that her husband is not the type to fall for cheap lies. The young lady agreed with her only in that Grisha was not interested in anyone around him, which was true, and therefore he would not take the side of any subordinate. She directed the flames of her fire magic straight at the two maids. The fire scorched the entire room and made a hot circle around the maids, blocking their passage to the door and any exit from there, leaving them in a helpless position. Galeza immediately demands that her mistress stop casting spells, even though she shouted loudest that she would only be bluffing and would not do anything to her. Fionnetta asks if they are ready to swear that they will never insult her again and will serve her faithfully and truly, because only then will she stop the spell and stop casting magic. The headmaid, Miss Brailfer, comes in and asks what is going on and why everyone is making such a fuss. At this point, the screaming servant immediately rushes into joy, and in her evil eyes there appears hope that the one of higher rank will take her side. She screams that their mistress is a savage who uses magic against them. Fionnetta says that those servants insulted her and asks if she will defend them. The headmaid says she will not defend the maids who insulted their own young mistress. The young lady immediately casts a new spell, and a fiery mark appears around her hand, creating an increasingly powerful flame, and asks if they heard what Miss Brailfer said. The girl says that the maids will be severely punished for such serious violations and insults. The servants began to spread new rumors and whisper about their mistress's actions, doubting that their master had married of his own free will. But despite everything that had happened, the sun was shining outside and decorating the blue, clear sky, while the first snow settled on the tree branches. The girl spends time at a tea ceremony in the company of only one maid. The maid Matilda says that everyone in the estate is now discussing her mistress, saying that while the master is not at home, she allows herself to do as she pleases. Fionnetta, on the other hand, is childishly just happy about a good day and cannot contain her emotions. The two maids were punished with a pay cut and cleaning of the stables, and they also returned all the stolen money and jewelry. While the servants thought that Fionnetta had gone mad, the lady herself realized that the head maid was suspicious of her and did not know her motives, but was grateful for her assistance. The maid Emmeline speaks of the imminent return of Mr. Gregory, and her mistress immediately asks if her husband has been hurt. She already knows that Grisha will return in a few days, but strangely enough, she is worried. This time, the young lady wants to greet you as a worthy wife. The military part of the castle returns through the main gate. Mr. George, with the same imperturbable face, leads the entire regiment on horseback. The servants immediately become delighted and shout joyful words to the young owner of the castle, rejoicing that everyone has returned and has not lost a single soldier. Defeating the magical beast itself is a difficult task, but young Master Grigori Ides is incredibly strong, and the hunt is over in a few days with minimal injuries. But the head of the house was almost indifferent to everyone's joy. To their return, he was only fulfilling his duty. While the maids were already whispering about their business, a blue-haired warrior from Grigori's regiment noticed. He tells his master that the servants are behaving rather strangely. The maid Galeza immediately runs up to her master first and screams almost at the top of her lungs, feigning genuine fear. She screams that the mistress is treating them badly. Fionnetta notices how Galeza immediately runs to her husband, and this turns all her plans upside down. But the girl is sure that Grisha will not believe some lying maid who, even after punishment, is trying to ruin his life. Then she suddenly remembers that, according to all the rumors, the gentleman has a lover. This makes the young lady decide to get away from the hustle and bustle before anyone notices her. She thinks that her husband may still suspect her of something that is already so frightening that he decides to wait at his place. At this moment, Galeza wants to pretend that the mistress is torturing them and mocking them terribly. But in response to all this shouting and noise, Mr. Georgie doesn't even say a word, just continuing to look at her. The maid is sure that her husband does not value the imposed wife at all, and therefore will not be kind to her and will not forgive such an attitude towards the servants. Then another servant adds that Fionnetta threatened with magic. They all start saying that his marriage to the Flameswoman was a huge mistake, and they are afraid to live under the same roof with her, with what they call a barbarian in a skirt. Galeza immediately almost breaks into a smile, that all the servants are on her side, and, full of confidence that they will succeed, she tries to tell all this to Grigory again and pretends to be a sufferer. She asks to do something about it, but the gentleman just looks at her with a serious and cold gaze. A warrior from his regiment begins to speak and addresses him. The head maid greets her master and asks what all the noise is about. The maid Galeza immediately begins to blame Miss Brailfer for ignoring her mistress's cruel actions. The young gentleman immediately orders the lady who has annoyed him to shut his mouth. Miss Brailfer is ordered to tell exactly what happened during his absence, which the lady does rightly. She says that the maids did not obey their mistress, stole her money and jewelry that he had given her, and she is deeply ashamed and sorry that she allowed this to happen. The girl added that his wife had shown great kindness to them by not firing them both at all, and Grisha only responded with one short, clear answer. Immediately, Galeza begins to have a painful tremor, from which even her voice trembles, and her eyes cannot hold their gaze in one place, and even so she tries to justify herself. The young master of the house says that if they do not want to obey Fionnetta, then there is no work for them here. The lying maid immediately understands that the real punishment has already arrived and there is no way back. Grisha orders Miss Bralfer to take care of this, which the maid does. Galeza starts begging her master not to do this and only screams louder, tormenting everyone else. She asks him to have mercy on her and is already running after him until she is stopped by a knight from the regiment. The blue-haired warrior decides to ask his master if he will say anything in defense of his wife. Grisha asks him what he thinks he should say in her defense. The warrior replies that Grigory could clarify the situation with the flames, and doesn't it seem to him that people will continue to do bad things since he didn't say anything? But the young gentleman only replies that he should not worry about it and that no one will touch her. The reason for this is that if someone insults her, then that same person will insult me too. The warrior says that everything will be as their master wills. He heard that Prince Oswald supported Lord Gregory when he became head of the house. It doesn't matter that he is married to a girl from the Flames family, because their master could not disobey the king's order. For Gregory's sake, his warriors must ensure the safety of his wife. Fionnetta sat in her room, hugging herself, thinking only about what all the servants could have told, and whether Grisha believed them all. She is afraid that if the man believed them, then all her efforts will be in vain and nothing will change. How can someone ask for forgiveness after knocking on the door? Miss Bralfer asks permission to enter, to which she immediately receives permission. There is an awkward pause and tension between them, which does not please the young lady of the house at all. The headmaid says that her subordinates not only showed her disrespect, but also dared to lie to the master's face. The lady asks for forgiveness for all the inconvenience caused to her and makes a low bow, which greatly surprises her mistress. She is pleasantly embarrassed by the fact that Miss Bralfer agrees with her and has not made any judgment. Mr. Gregory asked me to convey to her the message that his wife can do with those maids as she wishes. If she has not forgiven them, then he does not mind if they are fired. Fionnetta, in shock, asks again if everything is true, to which she hears that she misheard everything that was just said. The girl can't even believe that everything happened exactly like this. This prompts her to think that even if Grisha does not have feelings for her, he at least gives her the opportunity to become the mistress of the estate. She decides to do as she pleases. The young lady fired the guilty maids and they left the estate that same day. The dismissed maids complained of unfair treatment, but no one else tried to drive Fionnetta out of the estate. But Galeza still said that this was not the end. And at the moment when they left, some third-party observer was watching them forever. The next day it was already calmer, and in a new yellow dress, Fionnetta looked out the window. The girl begins to guess what Grisha is thinking, that since she is his wife, it will be easy to attract his attention, but it turns out that everything is not so simple. The young lady wants to take on the responsibilities of managing the castle instead of her eternally absent husband, who simply does not have time to look after his own house, which everyone takes advantage of. She already imagined the smile of a joyful Grisha, who sincerely praised her and was proud of the work she had done. Fionnetta is very motivated by these fantasies about a happy husband. The young lady walks along the corridor and thinks that if she wants to take the role of mistress of the entire estate, then she will, one way or another, need people, and it will not be possible to manage the entire castle at once alone. At the moment, the entire castle is run by the butler Crofan. The girl feels awkward communicating with him because the memory that she killed him in her past life still torments her and cannot give her even a moment of peace. But right now, she's about to change her future. The girl walks around the vast territory of the castle in search of a butler who is supposed to manage everything, but so far her search remains unsuccessful. Then someone suddenly turns to her and calls her mistress. This someone asks if he can help her with anything. This man turns out to be Alfer, who serves as the captain of the knights in the aids house. The young lady immediately turns around and realizes that in front of her is an excellent warrior and Grisha's closest comrade, which creates some tension, which is already beginning to be felt. The girl says that she is looking for Crofan, and could he tell her where the butler is now? Alfer asks what the lady has in mind this time. She answers him seriously and calmly that she only wants to help with the fulfillment of duties and has no other plans, so there should be no reason for unnecessary concern. The night captain says that everything is as he thought, which makes him roll his eyes and raise his hand to his face. The young lady asks if something is wrong and if there is any reason to think badly about it. The man tells her not to forget that his master married her by order of the king, so that she does not forget about it. He says that the master does not want her to indulge in unnecessary things and take on unnecessary worries, and no one wants her to play the role of mistress of the house. The girl only replies that now everything has become clearer to her, and it's as if a match without a flame goes out right there in her face, and all the enthusiasm seems to disappear at that very moment. She asks her to forgive her and leaves at the same pace. The night captain thinks that the young lady gave in too quickly, which surprises him. He is amazed at how easily his mistress gave up her plan, and he does not understand what is going on in her head. Several more long and tedious days pass. Fionnetta is in a terrible mood and does not know what she should do. The girl could not even imagine that the hostility towards her would be so great, which only increased all the negative influence on her in her own experiences. Since Grisha returned from work, there has not been a single chance to meet him, which makes her unable to understand what she should do. But then someone knocks on the door again, which brings the young lady out of her thoughts about herself. The new maid enters the room with a vase of flowers in her hands and asks Fionnetta for forgiveness. The girl is trying to remember even the name of this new person, who appeared on her horizon quite recently, but the name Hope comes to mind. Hope had come to work recently after Galeza's expulsion, and was the only one of the servants who agreed to serve Fionnetta, and she was the only one who didn't mind. The young mistress considers her an unusual girl, because most likely the new worker understood how everyone treated the mistress, but she went with joy. The maid was also extremely smart, and seemed to be the same age as Fionnetta herself. The girl says that she would like to ask the maid something, to which Hope herself says that her mistress should, of course, ask whatever she wants, whenever she wants. Fionnetta asks what she would do if she had a person with whom she wanted to get closer, if that person did not pay attention to her. The maid immediately starts to smile playfully and says that everything is clear to her. She asks directly whether her mistress wants to get closer to the master, but then she immediately shouts that she didn't say anything at all, not a word about him. Hope advises spending more time together. The chatty girl begins to talk more and more about their walks together and says that the time spent together will definitely bring them closer. Here Fionnetta says that there is at least a little time, but there is also a small chance. The maid suggests having dinner together, and the hostess herself could invite her husband to have dinner with her. But the girl is embarrassed and says that it is unlikely that he will agree, and most likely Grisha will refuse. The chatterbox's face only changes and becomes sadder from such words from her mistress. She says with a smile on her face and hope in her heart that you should at least try to take the first step. Hope suggests writing her a letter if the mistress is embarrassed to invite him herself, and the maid will give him a note. Fionnetta says she will do so. The maid is delighted to say that her mistress looks charming, and a spark of admiration appears in her eyes. A girl with a special pearl necklace and a luxurious pink dress asks if she looks too pretentious, embarrassed from being unaccustomed to it. All the servants are very surprised by such a beautiful image of the lady, which makes everyone admire her at once, that no one even tried to hide, but simply admired, despite their attitude towards her. The girl holds herself well and also just modestly walks around the castle, while all the maids look at her with hope in her luxurious dress. Looking in the mirror, the girl repeats to herself that she is now dressed even more elegantly than usual, even by aristocratic standards, but she is still trying to get used to this outfit better. Gregory was already waiting in the room, which was shiny and sparkling from a massive and beautiful chandelier, and which seemed to promise a good time. The master of the house was so surprised by the appearance of his wife that even his face changed, although it was still not clear whether she had a good or bad impression. The girl is stressed by her husband's silence about his wife coming, and this makes her feel stupid. But the young lady is absolutely sure that they will become closer over dinner. Then the butler suddenly drops the knife on the floor, which frightens the lady, who immediately asks what happened. Grisha tells her that nothing happened, and she needs to sit opposite him at the table. She, already embarrassed, approaches her seat. Fionnetta thanks him for giving her the opportunity to fire those servants, and she herself wants to fulfill the duties of the mistress of the estate. The man simply and easily agrees to her request. There is an awkward pause between them that haunts the girl. She begins to remember her home, where it was customary to discuss family matters at the table. The atmosphere at her home seemed more oppressive to her, and she remembered it in gray, joyless colors. They exchange glances, but the girl continues to tense up because there is silence between them, which does not allow her to calm down. She begins to think that it is her fault, which immediately causes her face to change. Fionnetta notes that her favorite dishes were prepared for her, and the cooks here are very attentive, which also leaves only a short answer from the owner of the house. Grigory notes that this is the first time they have sat at the same table together, to which the girl clearly agrees. She asked after all the awkward pauses if Grisha liked her dress because it was custom-made, and every servant couldn't take his eyes off her. The owner of the house says that you can't see his shoulders. The girl is immediately surprised by such clarification and the first reaction, but here's the question whether she is cold, and she herself answers whether he hit his head. Fionnetta reminds us of the magical heating of the castle, which is what the man himself recalls. She begins to think that Grisha does not want to talk, and begins to wonder whether it was customary to greet under the previous head of the family. The girl asks to tell her whether her new dress suits her or not. The young lady says that she thinks it is very cute and suggests that they practice small talk, because as the head of the family, Grisha must be able to communicate with people. But the head of the castle still remains silent, as if he is still flying in his thoughts and plans. Grisha says that the dress is beautiful, and his face seems to begin to shine, like the most beautiful snowflake with the most complex but therefore unique pattern, and his face and gaze become softer. The young lady herself immediately blushes like a fresh and soft strawberry, and her red hair emphasizes this, but it will definitely remain in her heart for a long time. The girl has to look away from too much embarrassment, and in her memory there is only the more serious look of her husband than ever. She admits that he managed to embarrass her, but Grisha didn't stay on the sidelines either, and his cheeks turned just as red, which he didn't even try to hide. Fionnetta suddenly runs up to him and touches his forehead, checking to see if the man has a fever, to which she says that the temperature is normal, although this only makes her husband blush even more from awkwardness. She doesn't take her hand away and tries to understand everything better, without being in any particular hurry. At that moment, the young gentleman abruptly pushes her hand away, which takes her out. Grisha quickly apologizes to her for this, while the girl does not understand anything, and even such a sharp change in mood, and such a rude gesture. The girl immediately tries to start saying that she is just worried, but a servant suddenly runs to the door and asks his master for forgiveness for distracting them, but the matter is urgent. One of the night captains says that they have received an urgent message from Madame Blanche, which cannot wait and must be read immediately. It was Renapolis, who was also one of Gregory's closest associates, and whose distinguishing feature was a scar on his nose. The girl and the man's cheeks remain red, but he quickly realizes that this is a letter from his mother. The head of the house says that he will talk to him after the meal, and even the captain of the knights of his own regiment must wait a little. Mrs. Blanche is the wife of the former Marquis of Aza, and her health is not the best now, which is why such a reverent attitude is shown towards her. Fionnetta says that it would be better for him to listen to the message now and send a response, to which Grisha himself tries to say the opposite, but his attempt does not end in success. She only tells him with a kind look and kindness to go, because his mother, in poor health, cannot wait. She felt bad about the abrupt end to their meal, but it definitely helped them become closer, which already made her very happy. The girl says goodbye to her husband, who turns around with all his attention at her voice. Fionnetta, with a beautiful smile and genuine joy from the time they spent together, says that it would be wonderful to have dinner together again. Grisha only agrees with this and goes to listen to the letter from his mother. He asks Renapolis what his beloved mother asked him to convey. Alfred says the woman didn't ask him to give her anything. The young gentleman begins to look with a gloomy coldness, and his gaze becomes as if biting the very soul, asking whether the two captains of the knightly regiment of his own house deceived him. The blue-haired captain immediately begins to try to justify his actions, saying that the lie was a necessary measure due to great concern for the well-being of the Ides family. Gregory immediately asks why he distracted him from dinner with his wife, and the knight replies that he thought that his master did not want to spend time with the daughter of the Flames house. At that moment, the master of the Aids house shouts at the top of his lungs that he won't tell him twice, and grabs Alfred by the collar of his knightly uniform. The knight's captain immediately turns pale in the face, and his master immediately begins to say that their families have been feuding for a long time. Grigory himself understands everything, but all the fears concern his wife as well. She was sent to the enemy's house all alone, and he doesn't feel sorry for her at all. The man shouts that Fionnetta invited him to dinner first, and that no one could dare to disturb them, while the culprit's own gaze crawls downwards in fear. Alfred immediately asks for forgiveness for his misdeed and falls to his knees. Gregory leaves, leaving the knights to each other, while the instigator of the adventure cannot even find the strength to rise from the knees to which he had deservedly fallen. Renaplis asks about Alfred's condition, to which he hears only another piercing scream. The blue-haired knight captain shouts that he cannot understand why Mr. Gregory is protecting a woman from the Flames house, who have always been their old enemies. He just thinks that it could very well be, but doesn't say it out loud. A whole day had already passed, and Fionnetta was looking in the mirror in her room. The girl remembers what Grisha said about her dress and blushes again from embarrassment. She understands that she is used to receiving compliments, but it was from him that even one simple word stuck in her heart and forever in her memory. Another knock on the door makes her distracted from the flow of her thoughts about a new meeting with her husband, which slightly irritates the young lady. Miss Brailfer apologizes for disturbing her, saying that the young gentleman called her. This surprises the girl and her cheeks turn red again. There is only one question on her mind: what does the Marquis need? And she already arrives with a maid and a butler. Gregory says that they received a letter from the king, and a delegation from their side is going to the kingdom of Lautred. According to the letter, during the trip, they want to stay with them, which leads to a stupor and very much shocks all three who came at the same moment. He says that he is often away from home due to his duties as head of the house and asks to greet the guests as befits him. The butler asks who is part of the delegation, and the young gentleman replies that His Highness the First Prince d'Askenda will go as an ambassador. Fionnetta is worried that Crofan has not brought her up to speed, which is definitely stressing her out, and she herself will have to greet the First Prince. This becomes a new cause for concern, whether the girl will be able to meet the First Prince as it should be. In her past life, the Crown Prince came to them, but there was no talk of the arrival of the very first one. The girl asks when his visit is scheduled. Grigory says that they will be visited in 2 weeks. All three are immediately surprised by the First Prince's quick arrival and shout out the same words about 2 weeks. The young lady asks why they were not informed earlier, and the husband immediately answers her that he only recently found out about it. She realizes that they have little time to prepare. The butler immediately asks the girl to listen to him. He says that preparing for a royal reception in 2 weeks is quite a challenge, and asks if she is ready to do that. Fionnetta only says with complete acceptance that she has no other choice, and that she will have to prepare with all her might. The butler is surprised in his thoughts, realizing that although the young lady is from the Flames, she is ready to fulfill her role as the mistress of the Aids house. He says with shining eyes that they will work together and help each other with the difficult reception of the most important guests. The man says with a smile that they will start right now, and the headmaid even smiles too, with great relief. They need to prepare special luxurious decorations. Making a special menu for guests according to their taste is no less important. Crofan says they have to take every detail into account when meeting royalty, and they have a lot of work to do. This was far more than the young lady could have imagined, but Miss Brailfer asks to rely on her and the butler. The woman says that Fionnetta must personally meet the First Prince, and Crofan understands that it will be difficult, but she will need to learn royal etiquette in a short time. The young lady confidently says that 2 weeks will be enough for her to learn everything. The butler and the head maid are silent, but their faces show uncertainty. Crofan says that perfect knowledge of manners will not be enough. Fionnetta immediately asks why this won't be enough, immediately becoming more confused. The man says that the main rule of hospitality is to show interest in the guest's personality. No matter how good her ideal manners are, the main thing is not to spoil the guest's mood. This causes the same incredible confidence to disappear from Fionnetta's face. Miss Brailfer says the First Prince rarely appears in public and does not treat the House of Aids, so they do not know what dishes he prefers, and it is difficult to know how to communicate with him. Gregory says he doesn't know who he could ask about him, but he'll see what he can do. Fionnetta begins to think about what the First Prince might like. There and then she begins to consult with the servants, and at that moment her husband was looking at her. He didn't take his eyes off her, and a slight blush appeared on his face. The girl begins to get a headache from the amount of information from the books that have accumulated around her. Crofan said that she needed to remember at least the basics, pointing to the mountain of books. After all, if the lady doesn't look after the house, then nothing good will come of it. and she herself must take the geography and history of the aides' possessions, not to mention mastery of magic. From her past life, the girl only remembered etiquette lessons and didn't study anything else. Fionnetta wants to immediately start preparing for the prince's visit, but she does not have enough time. Even her personal servants are busy with preparations. The girl realizes that she needs new allies. Here, the evening is already coming and the warm rays of the sun fall on the room decorated with gold furniture. Hope's maid asks if her mistress called her. The young lady asks if her maid would like to look after her. She doesn't understand anything and only replies that she already works as her maid. This is confirmed by Fionnetta herself, looking at her very seriously. The young lady asks if the servant would like to be her confidant. Hope was immediately confused and could not answer anything right away, surprised by such a proposal. Fionnetta explains her proposal by the fact that there are a lot of maids working in the mansion, and she wants a maid to become her assistant. The girl says that she is looking for a man who will never betray her. Hope became her maid by pure chance and managed to become friends with everyone in the estate, both the Ides family and the Flames family. She managed to find a common language with absolutely all the other servants. This is what her mistress liked about her, because the ability to fit in well with a team is an extremely useful talent. Hope says that the lady overestimates her because she always wanted to help her. After trying to refuse and appear as a simpler maid, the young mistress said that she knew that the servants were engaged in selling information. The young lady also says that her maid gained the trust of servants from both families in order to then sell the information to others. The talkative maid doesn't understand how her mistress found out about this. Fionnetta says that if she disperses the servants, Hope will not see her position. The girl says that she won't do it and suggests that the maid guess the reason herself. But she won't do that because she likes the maid, which the young mistress admits. Hope asks what benefit she will get from such an offer. The owner tells her that she will pay her extra and that she will receive a decent reward for her services. Hope says she would be happy to work for her. The maid smiles happily at her young mistress. Still, Fionnetta doubts her sincerity. The servant thinks in her mind that her mistress is not so simple. The young lady does not want to repeat the incident with the servants' rebellion. Otherwise, she would not have been able to establish relations with the Marquis, so she attracted an ally to her side, showing character. Now she is ready for what her future holds for her and sees her new maid in front of her, who has become her ally. The girl immediately turns to her, to which the servant happily responds. Fionnetta, in a more determined and confident tone, says that she has a task for her new ally. Gregory did not refuse to have dinner together, but continued to remain silent. He asks how the preparations for the meeting with the first prince are progressing, to which he hears the answer that everything is going as usual. The man promises to join them as soon as he sorts out his family affairs. This is very embarrassing for Fionnetta in a pleasant way. She says that he is already completely absorbed in the duties of the head of the house, so he should not worry and can rely on his wife. He immediately looks at her with his rather stern gaze, but then the coldness leaves his face and he reassuringly thanks her for it. The head of the house offers to assign one of the knights to his wife while the first prince arrives, to which the girl does not object, but asks if the knights have enough other concerns. The husband answers her that he has already taken care of everything, and the young lady can calmly give him orders on his behalf, for which she immediately thanks him. Hugo, who is the knight of the first squad, comes running at that very moment, and his eyes are shining with joy because the young master himself called him. Gregory tells the knight that he must be with Fionnetta until His Highness the First Prince leaves them. Shocked by this, Hugo screams and asks the same thing again, unable to believe what he heard. At that moment, the heir of Idzov asks if the young knight is against it, to which the young man says that everything will be as soon as he is ordered. The young man immediately thinks about the fact that he was entrusted with protecting the master's own wife. Previously, he had only had to protect Madame Blanche and Madame Era. He hopes that he will not embarrass Mrs. Fionnetta, who also does not immediately fully get used to such a change. The knight thinks that somehow they will survive this and introduces himself with a bright smile from ear to ear. Fionnetta says she relies on him, and Hugo says he will gladly protect her. The girl is busy preparing for the prince's visit, day and night, while the knight drags more and more stacks of books to her table. Miss Browfer helps with choosing outfits and trying on dresses and how to practice all the rules of etiquette. A long week passes, and the head maid, in front of the butler, asks to show Fionnetta everything she has learned over the past week. The young lady speaks with even more confidence than when they first started, that there is no cause for concern. Crowfan thinks that his mistress must demonstrate knowledge of etiquette for receiving royalty and confirm her status as the hostess of the house. But he has serious concerns about the fact that it is impossible to perfect his skills in a week, no matter how high quality the education in the Flames house is. He remembers how he addressed his master. The butler said that it was too reckless to entrust the organization of an important event to a young, inexperienced woman. But Gregory told him in response not to worry about it. The man's mind still has doubts despite his master's words, until the headmaid suggests introducing the young lady to the head butler as the first prince. Miss Brailfer says to start training with it and to start now. The young lady immediately begins to tell about the history of the Ides house and their agricultural trades. The girl, surrounded by a beautiful garden on the vast grounds of the castle, in her most beautiful form, talks about her new home. At this point, Crowfan turns to Fionnetta, to which the young lady responds immediately, along with Hugo, who follows him. The butler is completely delighted and says with shining eyes that she has perfected her skills in such a short period of time. The knight immediately rejoices almost more than his mistress herself, and Fionnetta is embarrassed by the words that they doubted her, but this was definitely a mistake and she was underestimated. The headmaid says that the girl did great for her first time and that the Flames family's training is top-notch. Fionnetta understands that it is not only about her education, but decides to remain silent about it. While her husband did not take her seriously in her past life, she went to social parties, consoling herself with it. Everyone walked back to the castle, completely satisfied with the training. Hugo calls his mistress an incredible person and notes that the two of them showered her with compliments, and she replies that it could not be otherwise. In her eyes, he looked like a silly but loyal puppy, but still, she didn't want to look like some kind of villain in his eyes. Everything was going very well, which made the young lady happy. Then someone knocks on the door again, which knocks the girl out of her thoughts. Hope enters the room and apologizes for disturbing her. The chatterbox says that she has completed the task that her mistress gave her and gives her a detailed report. The girl thanks the servant for the work done. She decided to give her maid and now confidant a small test of her abilities and says that it is a good job, but in her mind, she understands that she has even exceeded all expectations. Hope says she is glad to help the lady and hears that her efforts are noticeable, and they were good. But then he asks why she needed to collect this information, to which he hears the answer that it was necessary when meeting with the first prince. Fionnetta remembers how everything went in her past life, so any information will play into her hands. The maid decides to ask about the first prince. She is interested in why the second prince became the heir to the throne. Her mistress begins to explain the reason for this difficult question. There was a specific reason why the first prince was not given the right to inherit the throne. Prince Duskenda is a fine man and pleasant to be around, but he could not become the heir as he remains the son of a mistress and is not worthy of becoming king. Even the hair color of the king and the second prince is golden, because they are direct relatives and this is immediately visible. And the first prince had dark hair, like coal, which all people immediately saw. In addition, Duskend does not possess light magic. Since he is not able to use light magic, he cannot be called a full-fledged member of the royal family. But everyone around was talking only about the fact that the second prince was destined to take the throne. In her past life, Fionnetta was negatively disposed towards the general negative and derogatory attitude towards the first prince, considering it undeserved. Each candidate for the throne must possess light magic, which limits the possibility of anyone else getting the throne. Prince Dasken Turd is a handsome man who charms everyone around him, with a wonderful character and a wonderful mind, but he was unhappy because he had everything except light magic. Fionnette feels like the first prince doesn't know what rumors are going around about him, but she's curious about what kind of person he is. The very day is coming, for which almost everyone in the castle has been preparing for so long. The Ides family welcomes the first prince with honor and great joy. The boy and girl are beaming with happiness and seem to light up everything around them. Through the multitude of servants who bowed before the royal guests with great honor, greeting the first prince who himself, even in black robes, shines with mutual joy just as strongly. Daskend Turd sincerely thanks Fionnetta and Grisha for agreeing to accept them all. The first prince's confidant apologizes for interrupting the conversation and says that His Majesty has conveyed a message to Marquis Ides. Gregory asks his wife to see the guests out while he takes care of business. The girl immediately agrees and smiles at him again. The man tells the first prince that his wife will accompany him while he is busy. Dasken says that everything is fine and that Lady Ides should not worry. He immediately makes a good impression with his impeccable manners and good-natured smile with royal origins, and the rumors were not lying. They say that if the first prince doesn't like something, the reputation of the aristocrats will be ruined. The prince personally does not spread rumors. Those around him gossip about the terrible reception. The young lady did not want to ruin her reputation, so she will do everything to provide a warm welcome. Alfred thinks that a woman from the Flames house was allowed to represent the Ides house at the meeting of His Highness, and Hugo was also assigned to guard her, and Matilda, about strengthening the reputation of the lady. The maid's gaze met the knight's and both looked away, embarrassed even by such awkward interactions. Fionnetta begins to give a tour of the castle with the permission of the first prince. She talks about the paintings in the foyer that tell stories from the lives of the Ides family members. This painting was painted in memory of the fact that the founder of the Ides family was saved by a spirit in the form of a white wolf, which is also depicted on the coat of arms of the house, for the same reason. The first prince says that the painting is beautiful and asks for the same amount of money as the castle of Celian, to which he receives the answer that everything is so. Dasken Turd recalls that the first head of the house was lost in the mountains, and a spirit, taking the form of a wolf, led him to the hut. The girl corrects him and asks for forgiveness that the spirit led the first head to the village and not to the hut. The man starts laughing and says that the girl knows a lot about the Ides house. The maid Hope is suspicious and looks askance at the noisy guest. The young lady and the first knight both look at the special necklace. The man notes that 5 generations have already been buried in the Ides house. The girl says that according to historical records, its owner was a worthy aristocrat, and Duskend asks if this decoration is capable of enhancing magic. The young lady replies that it could accumulate the magical energy of its owner, but it has lost this ability. When the lady was attacked by bandits, she used all the magic of the necklace to fight off the attackers. The first prince says that he heard that a spirit had visited this garden in front of which they stand. Fionnetta suggests telling this story. The two of them are having a very light and interesting conversation. Both are at ease with each other and do not experience any discomfort. Daskend thanks the lady for the story, saying that he really enjoyed it. He walks further and looks back, meeting the gaze of the lady of the house. The girl breathes a sigh of relief and thinks that she is actually glad that the excursion went without incident. Hugo says his mistress did a great job. The talkative knight calls her very elegant and educated, for which the girl herself thanks him. Hope begins to say that she found the man suspicious. Fionnetta decides to ask if the servant is talking about the first prince, to which she hears an affirmative answer. Her intuition tells her that he is not such a good person as he wants to seem, and her mistress needs to be more careful. Fionnetta herself also subconsciously understood something like that, because even the praise of her knowledge was not entirely sincere, as it seemed to her. She tells the knight and the maid that she will prepare for the banquet in her room. It was there that the girl met her husband again. The young lady admires his beauty and remarks that the formal suit suits him. He asks if everything is okay, but then his wife says that everything is okay. Fionnetta tells them to go together quickly and not to make the prince wait. She is offended that her husband did not even say a word or praise her, because he could have said at least a word. The young lady went to lead her husband with slight irritation. Gregory smiles when he looks at her, which is still new for him, that he can so calmly and carefree show warm feelings. The banquet table delighted with its huge variety of the most unusual dishes, which were selected to suit the tastes of the royal guests. The first prince also notes that there are many of his favorite dishes here. Even the browsers that grow on the lands of the Ides were served at the table. Fionnetta admits that the menu was tailored to his preferences, which pleased both parties. The girl says that the main thing now is that he likes everything, and in her memory from a past life, she remembered that he liked it, but Hope also confirmed all of this. Daskin says that the decorations also deserve special praise, and asks if the lady made all these preparations. The young lady thanks him for all the praise. She says that she knows that birds are revered in his mother's house, which is why the hall was decorated like that. The first prince says that the young lady is well informed about his mother's family, and he already realized during the tour that she knows a lot of things. When members of the royal family visit, it is customary to decorate the house with symbols of the spirit of light, an attribute of the royal family. The element of the Ides family is ice, so the hall is decorated with symbols of light and ice. Therefore, even the food must be appropriate, which is what he reminds himself of with just one glance at the table. In the myths about the foundation of the kingdom, the spirit of water saved the spirit of light from danger and treated him to a potato dish, so potato dishes are an integral part of royal receptions. Fionnetta thinks that all her efforts were not in vain. The first prince addresses the young lady. Grigory comes right away and immediately stands next to his wife. Duskend begins a new conversation with Mr. and Mrs. Aids. He says that he heard about the quarrel between them during the monster hunt. The Aids and Flames families had a big fight, and since then the family members can't stand each other. The man says with joy that all this turned out to be just stupid rumors. The prince wants to make sure that the marriage, by order of His Majesty, is not in danger of breaking up. Fionnetta begins to say that there is some truth in his words, that there used to be tense relations between their families, but it no longer concerns her. Since she is married into the Aids family and no longer belongs to the Flames house, her current title is Marquise of Aids. Although she was destined to be born into the Flames house, she is now part of the Aids house. This greatly confuses and shocks the head of the house himself, who, from such an unexpected speech, immediately forgets about everything else. Dasken says that the Flames are not so simple because even Fionnetta married the enemy and tries to be a good wife, which seems rather touching to him. Turning to the head of the house, he asks if a young girl from an enemy family can be accepted into the Aids house. Grigory also begins to say that they really did have a difficult relationship, but now everything is completely different. But he respects his wife immensely for the way she behaves as befits a marquise of the House of Aids. This also touches the girl to the very heart, and her view of her husband looks completely different and special. The first prince just starts to laugh a little. He says he sees a great future for them in the good hands of both families, and they get along great despite everything people say about them. Fionnetta thanks him for these words. The next day they all said goodbye. Dusken thanks young Mrs. Aids for agreeing to welcome them as guests so quickly. Fionnetta, noticing his reaction, understands with relief that the first prince liked everything and thanks them for staying with them. The man again addresses her as the Marquise of Aids, which again sends a chill through her. He approaches her and tells her that if she needs help, she should contact him. The first prince suggests that it is difficult to fulfill the role of an obedient wife. The girl thinks that the prince is joking. It seemed to her that she managed to convince him that there was a good relationship between her and her husband. She thanks him and tells him that he doesn't need to worry about her. He says it's wonderful and he had a lot of fun with her. Gregory comes to them and addresses the first prince. Daskind tells him to take care of himself, and Oswald has already filled him in on the situation. The head of the Aids house thanks him for this. The first prince says goodbye to them and goes to his carriage. Gregory bows and says goodbye to him, leaving him without loud farewells. The carriage began to set off far from the castle, the distance increasing more and more with every second. The man begins to talk about everything that happened and once again realizes that the relationship between the marquises of the House of Aids is not what they say. His shrill laughter frightens a whole flock of birds nearby, so that each of them immediately flies away from the terrible and piercing scream. This becomes very interesting for him. Fionnetta asks if there are any questions for her. Grisha looks at her and is in no hurry to answer. He says with a smile that the young lady did a great job as his wife. This again goes straight to the heart and makes the girl's cheeks blush. Crowfan says his mistress did a great job and got everything done very quickly. Hugo almost beams with happiness and says that the girl is great. Everyone around her tells her how well she did. Fionnetta felt her husband's gaze on her. This time it seemed to her that it was softer than usual, and there was even a smile on his face. A few days later, the heroine stood in her room, looked out the window and thought. The girl was immensely happy that the first prince's visit went smoothly and was proud of the work she had done. It even seemed that the attitude of those around her had changed. Perhaps she had even managed to win the favor of the servants from the Flames house. Besides, Fionnetta was very happy that Grisha praised her, and she constantly repeated these words in her head. But there was also something that upset the heroine. She felt that despite all this, Alfur still despised her. She understood perfectly well that he was worried about the fate of Gregory and the rest of the Aids family, and now Fionnetta had to prove with her actions that she did not wish harm to anyone. She also understood perfectly well that her efforts might not impress him. Over time, the girl became less worried. After all, she managed to gain the respect of Grisha and the servants. Meanwhile, Neslin, back at her estate, was simply beside herself with what she had just learned. She read an article in the newspaper which said that the Marchioness of Aids had given the first prince a warm welcome. The girl's hands began to tremble and her eyes began to fill with tears. Her brother immediately came up to her and began to calm her down, because he was well aware that Neslin had or even had some kind of romantic relationship with Grisha. He said that it was Neslin who should have been Mr. Gregory's wife, and not that girl from the Flames family. What a misfortune. The girl was already standing in tears and screaming that Fionnetta should not have been his wife. She even called the girl a brat. Brother Neslin told her that he was sure that Mr. Gregory was also upset that everyone admired her, because this marriage was not at all to his liking. And then the girl exclaimed that she had to save Grisha because she was his beloved. She immediately told her brother about her intentions, expecting words of support from him. And then she invited him to join her. The brother happily agreed, and the girl was completely delighted. Her mood immediately lifted and a wide smile appeared on her face. She thanked her brother for his help. Neslin really wanted to meet Mr. Gregory's wife, and Grisha himself came to Fionnetta and apologized for distracting her from resting after the delegation's departure. The girl smiled and asked him not to apologize. She asked what he wanted. The man said that the Fingus would start soon. The heroine did not immediately understand what was being discussed and thought for a while to remember what kind of holiday it was, after which she announced that this is an annual holiday honoring local spirits. It takes place on the lands of the Ides and is organized by the Marquis family, and Grigory asked his wife to take care of the organization. The girl was pleased by this and exclaimed that she would gladly take on all the responsibilities. He also added that Mostane and Naslin will come to visit them. They want to congratulate the family on the wedding and help with the preparations for the holiday. He also said that there was no need to give them a special reception, but that they would have to work with them for a while. Brother and sister from the side branch of the Ides. According to rumors, Neslin is Grisha's first love. The heroine didn't know whether these rumors were true, but it didn't matter. She was now thinking that it was a good coincidence, the holiday and the arrival of guests. She planned to show everyone at the holiday that she was a worthy Marquise of Ides. And then the guests arrived. Neslin immediately rushed towards Gregory with cries of joy. She started talking about how much she missed him, to which he replied that they had come a long way. Grigory said briefly, "Welcome." The brother and sister were quite similar to each other. Both had green hair and green eyes. Neslin was the daughter of a side branch of the Ides family. Mostane is Naslin's brother. The heroine greeted the guests warmly. She tried to behave rather modestly and at the same time politely. They also greeted each other, but there was a forced smile on their faces. Even the maids noticed this. These relatives addressed the Marquise rather familiarly, and it seemed that they already disliked her. Fionnetta understood that they most likely did not come for congratulations, since quite a lot of time had passed since the wedding ceremony, but nevertheless, she said that she was glad to see them. The girls' glances met. They both understood that they were acting fake that evening. Neslin kept making happy faces and saying how glad she was to be visiting Gregory, and then she said that she really wanted to be friends with his wife and glanced towards her brother. At this moment, even Grigory himself became a little tense. He found it strange. And Moisten made a respectful bow and added that he hoped that the Marquise would be able to become friends with his sister. "Of course," Fionnetta replied, forcing a smile. The man turned to his wife and asked for forgiveness. He needed to leave for a couple of days, so he wanted to leave the guests with her. While he was away, he would like her to be in charge of things. He asked if Fionnetta would mind that. But she was now an exemplary wife and tried to please everyone, so she answered with a smile that she would be happy to help. The green-haired family watched their dialogue and also smiled. The next day, when the Marquise left, Neslin immediately began to tell many stories that were connected with him. For example, that she got lost as a child and Grisha found her and was always kind to her. Fionnetta listened to all these stories but ignored most of them. She simply pretended to listen. Neslin invited them to have some fun, adding that she wanted to give her brother a gift when he returned. They all set off on the road together, and Neslin simply kept her mouth shut the whole time, which made Fionnetta a little nervous. Neslin knows Grisha much better than his wife, that's obvious. Fionnetta had also known him for a long time, but she had not communicated with him as closely as his distant sister. Finally, the road ended, and they began to get out of the carriage together. Fionnetta noticed that since Grisha had left, Moisten had stopped hiding his disdain. While they were walking around the city, the heroine asked them if they celebrated Fingust every year. "Of course," exclaimed the green-haired girl. She added that she herself helps Mrs. Blanche and Era pick berries every year. During the festival, it is customary to collect ripe Flugel's fruits and make offerings to the spirits. Neslin belongs to a side branch of the Ides family, so she helped with the collection of berries. Fionnetta thanked her for helping with the berry picking and warned that this year she would be busy preparing for the holiday. But when the girl turned in their direction, she noticed that the guys were just standing there with stony faces and did not react in any way. But when Neslin noticed the questioning expression on the heroine's face, she added that she felt very sorry for her because there was still something she didn't know. The girl did not understand what was being discussed. But suddenly they were interrupted by local traders who began asking the children if they were ready for the holiday. Also, one of the merchants said that he would wait for them with impatience. Neslin thanked him, but there was one thing. Moiston reported that this year the Marquise is in charge of the celebration. People were wary and surprised that this year, the holiday was given to this woman from the Flames house. Everyone began to whisper that the gentleman was supposed to marry Mrs. Neslin. The townspeople clearly did not like this information, and Fionnetta also began to worry about it. She did not understand how she could play the main role in the holiday if they treated her like that. But the girl clenched her fists and made a firm decision that if she performed the ritual without mistakes, people would change their opinions about her. A few days later at the Ides Palace, for some reason, Neslin called Fionnetta to her. The heroine was good-natured that day and approached them to find out what they wanted. But after Neslin and Moiston arrived, a hostile atmosphere reigns in the house, as if the heroine had only arrived at the estate yesterday. Moiston is clearly up to something shady, and Neslin is gaining the trust of the residents of the estate. Fionnetta thought that if she were as charismatic as Neslin, it would be easier for her to establish relationships. And now the heroine has already approached this family with the question of what they wanted. And finally, the guy approached her and said that he had been following the girl for several days. He felt that Fionnetta was not fulfilling her duties as a marchioness. Of course, she understood that these two had definitely not come to congratulate them and Grisha on their wedding. She said that she was sorry, but no matter what they did, she would remain the Marquise of Ides. Neslin immediately stretched her lips forward and said that she had not yet fulfilled the Marquise's main task. At first, the heroine did not understand what was being discussed, but Neslin immediately explained that she meant conceiving a child heir. Grisha only knows how to fight monsters and apparently doesn't want to spend the night with a savage from the Flames, the girl began to say. Her blood-red hair and eyes screamed that the Flames family came from monsters. And then she added that Fionnetta should not worry, because Neslin herself was ready to give birth to his heir. The heroine, without thinking twice, immediately swung and hit the girl in the face. She shouted at her not to get cocky. The brother immediately rushed to the girl to find out if everything was okay with her, and then began to make claims against Fionnetta for daring to act so meanly with Neslin. The girl replied that her hand simply slipped, and it was all because Neslin dared to insult her. Moiston asked his sister if this was true, to which she replied that she had only said that it was apparently difficult for Fionnetta to live in the Idesov household, and she wanted to support her. The Marquise was shocked and said that they apparently had warmed a poisonous snake to their bosom. A glance exchange occurred between the girls. Moiston was stern and began to say that the heroine apparently did not like the fact that Grigori loved Neslin, but at the same time she had no right to raise her hand to her. The servants immediately began to whisper that the Marquise had hit Neslin out of jealousy because the master did not love her. Fionnetta felt broken, as if she had been driven into a corner by such statements. The girl was sitting in the room in confusion when the maid came to her and said that she could not return what had been done, so now she needed to think about the next step. The heroine herself understood this perfectly well, because Grisha entrusted her with managing the estate, so she couldn't give up and needed to fix the current situation. She asked if there was a way to convince those around her. Of course, Hope replied with a smile, adding that it would be nice to fork out for her services. She definitely had a clear plan, since Fionnetta is from the Flames family. That's why she constantly needs to maintain her importance. It's funny how one mistake can turn everything upside down. Hope wondered how many people were supporting Neslin now that the house had hired new help. The next day, Fionnetta herself expressed a desire to talk to Neslin, but the maid reported that Neslin was not feeling well and did not let her into her room. She also rudely added that she would not be able to meet with Fionnetta. The heroine understood everything and went in the other direction along the corridor. Gradually she walked and heard how the servants were whispering about yesterday's situation, and everyone was feeling sorry for Neslin. The girl was upset because in such an atmosphere it was impossible to even discuss the holiday, but she decided that she could handle everything herself. She called Hugo and warned him that she was going to the city and asked him to prepare a carriage for her. He in turn asked what happened yesterday because the whole house was whispering about yesterday's incident. The heroine confidently answered that she hit Neslin in the face, explaining why she did it. Hugo was of course surprised and asked again if this was true. The girl told him everything and added that he might not believe her. She didn't care. One of the maids also reported that all the servants were on Neslin's side and asked what Fionnetta was going to do. The girl asked not to worry because she was not going to let this brother and sister do whatever they wanted. She understood that if she continued to show weakness, then Emmeline and her other servants could suffer. Hugo treated Fionnetta well, but even in this situation he did not trust her. The easiest solution is to kick the brother and sister out of this house, but if the heroine treats Neslin badly, it could ruin the relationship with Grisha. You need to think everything through. The girl went to the city, but even there everyone was whispering. Everyone was talking behind her back that this girl had allowed herself to be treated ugly by Neslin and that she was allowing herself to do this. She approached one of the couples she met on the street and asked to talk, but they answered sharply and briefly that it was time for them to go, and this was not the first time, which upset Fionnetta. But suddenly she heard a voice. The girl apologized to her and said that Fionnetta could contact her. She also said that the Marquis of Ides's family always takes care of them. The girl was incredibly happy and started smiling. She said that the guys would help her out a lot, and she wanted to ask about something. She said that she had never taken part in the celebration and thanked the children in advance for their help. The Marquise also asked Emmeline to give them a reward, and she obediently followed the order. When the girl handed them a few coins, they immediately began to worry and say that they did not deserve the reward. But Fionnetta still insisted that they take the reward because they helped her a lot, and she wanted to thank them somehow. Still, they agreed, and the heroine went to the carriage, and the guys began to discuss that the rumors were not true, and they did not believe that Mrs. Ides was mocking Neslin. The girl had a general idea of how to organize the holiday. The only thing she couldn't understand was how she was supposed to collect the berries using magic. She tried to do this in her past life, but she never understood what was wrong. Neslin, of course, is not going to tell her how to pick the fruits, and Grisha left at an unfortunate moment. The girl remembered the words that Gregory had told her before leaving, that he would like to entrust her with important matters. She was pleased, but now she wanted him to return faster. But then Moisten appeared on the threshold and in a rude tone told the girl to go into the living room, since Neslin wanted to talk, and also advised her to say thank you for the mercy shown. But Fionnetta wasn't going to bend over backwards so easily, and asked if Neslin was really going to apologize. Fionnetta nevertheless came to the girl's room and asked what she wanted, but asked her to speak faster, as she had a lot to do. The green-haired girl said that if the heroine apologized to her, she would forgive her. But she received an answer from the Marquise that if she admitted that she had insulted her and apologized, then she would also think about whether to forgive her. Moisten was already furious. He did not expect anything like this from Lady Fionnetta, but Neslin tried to stop him. Neslin laughed. She thought that Fionnetta was worth nothing in this house and asked her how she dared to behave like that. Wasn't she afraid of Grisha's wrath? She also added that if the heroine cannot cope with the duties of the Marquise, then another option can be found. In a marriage without love, a child will not be born, Neslin continued to taunt. But their conversation was interrupted by shouts from behind the door that they shouldn't go in there, it's a personal matter. But the door swung open and Grisha stood in front of the girls. He looked angrily at everything that was happening and also aggressively asked what was going on here. Neslin immediately ran up to him and began to complain that the Marquise had been very cruel to her all this time. The man immediately asked Fionnetta about this to clarify the situation. She did not deny it and told everything that Neslin insulted her, and she could not tolerate it, so she hit her in the face. Grisha was surprised and asked his wife again. The girl explained that Neslin said that she was going to have his child. Now he turned to Neslin and asked if it was true. The girl did not know what to answer, and Moisten also began to worry. They began to defend themselves and say that the Marchioness had completely frightened poor Neslin. They said that the Countess had taken advantage of Gregory's absence and was mocking her. The servants confirmed that they also saw the incident with the blow to the face, but the head maid Brailfer entered the room. She said that she had been too busy preparing for the party to keep an eye on things, but she had spoken to the servants and asked them to listen to Hope. She said that Madame Neslin had indeed insulted the Marquise. She was there and remembered every word she said. She began to quote Neslin's words verbatim, that Grisha only knows how to fight monsters and apparently does not want to spend the night with a savage from the flames. Her blood-red hair and eyes screamed that their lineage came from monsters. And then she said, "Don't worry, I will give birth to an heir for Grisha." The man's eyes widened from what he heard. He couldn't believe it. Moisten immediately began to shout that Grisha should not listen to this servant because she serves Fionnetta and says exactly what she is ordered to say. He claimed that his sister could not have said such a thing. Alfer enters the room and apologizes for disturbing him. Fionnetta was a little scared by this. She assumed that he was also going to protect Neslin. But Moisten was glad to see him, because he had heard that Alfer also did not get along with the Countess and wanted to use him to drive the girl into a dead end. Grisha turned to him and asked if he wanted to say something. He said that he had not heard what exactly Mrs. Neslin had said, but he could confirm that the lady had walked around the palace as if she were at home. She also whispered to the servants, slandering Madame Fionnetta, and in general their family behaved as if they were the Marquises of AIDS. Moisten and Enslin froze at these words and their gazes met with Izami. Moisten got angry again and started shouting at Alfer, "Why is he saying such things? He is Grigory's subordinate and he himself understands that he should have married Neslin." But he objected and added that everything was said correctly. He serves Mr. Gregory. That's why he never lied to him and has no intention of doing so. And then he bowed obediently in confirmation of his words. Neslin's face turned stony. She was afraid to approach Grisha, but she extended her hand to him and said that she didn't want this to happen at all. But his eyes were already burning with rage because they were supposed to help his wife, but instead they undermined her authority. And then he said that if those two showed up on his doorstep again, it would not be good. He asked Alfer to see this family off as soon as possible. The girl started screaming that she just always wanted to be near him and screamed words of apology, but it was too late. Grisha didn't want them to apologize to him at all. Blood started to flow from Neslin's eyes. She was just broken and cornered. She started screaming that she wouldn't do it. And then her screams began to get louder and louder. When the two left the palace, Gregory approached his wife and asked if everything was okay with her, to which he received a negative answer. She asked where he had been all this time. He, of course, apologized, but Fionnetta continued to accuse. She did not know how to pick Flugel's berries. The man was a little surprised, and the girl said upset that the holiday was coming soon, and she still hadn't learned how to collect them. He calmly replied that he would help her with this matter, and he extended his hand with the berries, asking to try them first. Fionnetta agreed and began to try to cast spells on them. She had too much magic, and he asked her to pour her powers in more slowly. And finally, she succeeded. These berries acquired small wings and fluttered upward. The satisfied heroine even screamed with joy that she was able to cope with this. And so, on the day of the holiday, the carriage was already heading to the city. The girl asked Grisha if he really didn't mind going with her. He asked not to worry because there was still a lot of time until the evening, but Fionnetta's question was not about that at all. She said that the townspeople didn't like her, but Grisha told her not to worry and offered to go with him, holding out his hand. The heroine was pleased by these words. She agreed, and said that she would do as he said. As they walked down the street, they also whispered behind their backs that Gregory had driven Lady Neslin and her brother out of his palace. These words upset the heroine. She felt sad, but she was ready for this. Grisha noticed her emotions and offered to give him her hand. Fionnetta was surprised. She didn't understand why he wanted to do this. But Grisha explained that there were a lot of people here, and he didn't want his wife to get lost here. Their hands touched each other tenderly. Fionnetta asked if he was worried about Neslin, but Grisha didn't even understand why he should be worried about that. But the girl added that Neslin means a lot to him. He coldly replied that it was not true, and the heroine could not understand in what sense this was, because she knew about the rumors. It was already getting dark outside, and it was time to pick berries. Fionnetta was already ready to fill them with her magic, but she was still a little worried. Luckily, everything went well, and she succeeded the first time. These fruits took off and illuminated the entire city with their magic. It all looked incredibly beautiful, and all the townspeople were surprised. They couldn't even believe that the lady did it herself. Grisha praised the girl for learning to control her flow of magic so precisely. He also said that it turned out very beautifully, and probably for the first time she saw a smile on Grisha's face, and she herself began to rejoice. But suddenly the man said that now he was talking about Fionnetta, not about the lights. He added that she looked great. The girl froze and thought that she had just imagined it. But Grisha approached her and apparently wanted to kiss her, while the heroine herself simply blushed in amazement. It was such a romantic moment that Fionnetta was definitely not ready for right now. In their past life, they always avoided each other. They never kissed or even touched each other. And now something like this is happening. It's so unexpected, but it's not like the heroine was against it. On the contrary, she was really looking forward to that very moment, but now she just froze in fear. And when their lips finally touched, a small animal jumped out of nowhere screaming that they were caught. This frightened both heroes, and they immediately turned around. This squirrel's name was Liaman. She said that she hadn't seen Fionnetta for a long time and waved her paw contentedly. It was a spirit. Grisha asked if the girl knew him. She replied that they had been friends for a long time. In her past life, the heroine was sad alone in the castle. She walked through the forest and met a spirit. With him, she was not so lonely. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and Fionnetta was very happy to see him. But why now, at such a romantic moment? But it was strange that Grisha reacted to this so calmly. The girl asked the animal what happened. She was surprised that Laman found her, but she caught herself thinking that they hadn't seen each other in this life, so how could he know her? It was very strange, and so she turned to Grisha with apologies. Taking the spirit with her, she ran away because they urgently needed to talk alone. The man tried to call her, but the girl still ran away. He was left standing alone and only now felt some embarrassment, and his cheeks turned red. He thought that he had somehow gotten carried away and thought that the heroine still hated him. But nevertheless, she smiled so beautifully. The image of Fionnetta still stood before the hero's eyes. He really hoped that the girl understood him correctly. When she and the spirit found a secluded place, the girl abruptly began interrogating him about how he knew her. The squirrel smiled sweetly and said that they were old friends. But the girl insisted that they should not have known each other, since in this life she had not yet had the good fortune to meet Laman. The spirit confirmed that she was right, and that they had not yet met in this lifeline. This is what scared the girl. It turns out that the spirit knows that she returned here from the past, and she asked if the spirit knew why she had returned here. But the spirit was unable to answer anything. He only smiled sweetly and apologized for it. He was just glad to see his girlfriend again and asked her not to be offended by him. But how could one be offended by this sweet creature, especially since they spent so much time together in their past life? She said that of course she wasn't offended, because they were friends. Laman smiled and jumped abruptly to the ground, saying only that it was time for him to go and quickly saying goodbye. Liaman remembers her from her past life. Is it possible that spirits are involved in her return? The girl began to think. So many questions in her head, and Liaman cannot answer them. And then she remembered that Grisha was waiting for her. She had run away so hastily and left him there alone. She remembered their kiss and how confused she was. Now she felt embarrassed for such behavior and what to do now and how to behave. Later, everyone gathered in the large hall. Grisha stood higher on the steps and clearly wanted to say something. The maids and all the servants began to whisper about what was going on here. No one understood. They also discussed whether it was true that Lady Neslin had been expelled from the palace along with her brother, and so he began to speak, and he was informed that during his absence, his wife had been mistreated in the palace. The servants who helped the scoundrels will be punished, and a thorough investigation will be conducted so that all those involved are punished and no one will be able to escape. Grisha ordered to remember his words once and for all, that Fionnetta is his wife and no one can claim her place. Some of the servants realized what awaited them and also began to whisper that they would have to beg the Lord for forgiveness. Hugo also began to worry because he once did not trust the lady and now believes that he is not worthy of the Ides house. Meanwhile, the heroine stood in her room and thought about what happened at the party. Grisha's words about her being beautiful were spinning in her head. It didn't work out that time, but maybe next time that long-awaited kiss will happen. They were even holding hands. She simply couldn't believe her happiness. She thought about the fact that Grisha didn't like being touched before. He clearly showed it at the wedding and during the dinner. I wonder why he doesn't like being touched, Fionnetta wondered. But an epiphany came to her. In her past life, she always felt a deadly cold from him. But now she didn't feel that way at all, but she just couldn't understand why. The next day, the girl attended training with Grisha. She felt a little awkward talking to him after what happened. But then one of the knights suddenly appeared on the horizon and called out to Mr. Gregory. He reported that monsters had been seen on his lands. He immediately responded to his words and said that all the knights should be urgently gathered for the hunt. And now the heroine realized that this was her chance. She ran up to her husband and asked him to take her along with everyone else. She insisted that he not refuse, because she already had complete control over her magic. He himself saw it yesterday. Hugo sided with Fionnetta and added that this was a good opportunity for the lady to learn about the situation on their lands. But he was worried because hunting magical creatures is a dangerous business. But the girl was confident in her abilities and said that she could stand up for herself, and Hugo added that they would also look after her. She couldn't stand by while her husband risked his life. Both men looked at her suspiciously, but still decided to agree to the request. The only thing Grisha asked for was that his wife not go far from him. She was delighted and thanked him. She understood that they would be hunting monsters for several days, during which time she planned to dispel the awkwardness between them. A few days later, the entire train was moving forward through the forest. The knights said that hunting monsters was not a fun activity at all, and they were surprised that the lady wanted to go with them. When they turned to look at her, Fionnetta was casting a spell. She even practiced magic on the road. But suddenly the space was engulfed in flames, and the girl warned the knights to watch their steps and be more careful. She did this because she had caught dinner. The motionless body of a deer lay before them. Everyone was shocked that the fire didn't spread to the plants. It was the first time they had seen someone use fire magic so accurately. The girl also heard these words, and she was glad that her efforts were appreciated. When they finally stopped and set up camp, everyone began to help each other diligently in cooking. Hugo noted with a smile that he did not recognize Fionnetta, and she said that before her marriage she often went hiking, so this was not surprising to her. He shouted to everyone that the lady was preparing dinner for them and suggested that everyone thank her for her efforts. She still felt awkward, but she was glad that she was spending time with Grisha. The knights do not trust her completely, but Hugo recently asked for forgiveness for believing Neslin, and perhaps he told her something to them and the knights. She saw that Alfred was still negatively disposed. He stood up for Fionnetta out of loyalty to his master, but he did not become more favorable to the heroine. The assistant suddenly called Mr. Gregory and Fionnetta. She said that she had prepared a place for them to spend the night. Now the key moment has arrived. The heroine really didn't expect anything, but she understood that they would spend this night together. He wouldn't throw his wife out of the tent into the street, in the middle of a forest teeming with magical creatures. But when they were inside the tent, Grisha said that he was going to sleep on the ground. "No," cried Fionnetta, "you still have to fight monsters." She understood that if he slept on the ground, he would not be able to get up tomorrow. She also added that they are husband and wife, and there is nothing wrong with them sleeping in the same bed. She abruptly grabbed Grisha by the hand and told him to go to bed quickly. Finally, they lay down. The girl turned away from him, and Grisha lay for some time with his eyes open and could not fall asleep. But in reality, she was not sleeping either. The girl felt his warmth and could not calm down. She persuaded herself not to think about nonsense. However, she still felt good about feeling Grisha's presence. She wondered if he was also worried or not. After a while, she turned to face her husband and simply admired how beautifully he slept. But suddenly she sat up abruptly because she caught herself thinking that she had never seen him sleep before. His hair was disheveled and the girl carefully straightened it. She would have admired him sleeping forever. Grisha suddenly woke up and Fionnetta also abruptly removed her hands from him. She exclaimed, "Good morning." When he got ready and went outside, he wanted to tell about what was known about magical creatures. Witnesses saw 5 creatures. It is not yet known what kind of magic they possess. He asked everyone to remain vigilant. It is said that northern bears are much larger than those that live in the homeland of Fionnetta, and it was certainly better not to attract their attention. The entire squad went in search of these creatures. Suddenly, they all stopped in their tracks as a cracking sound was heard deep in the forest. It was that same bear. He was slowly approaching the people, but his size immediately made them wary. However, it was only a cub, but everyone immediately armed themselves and handed over the room to everyone to be ready. The bear stood up on his hind legs and magical balls began to spin around him with force. This was something new for the Marquis team. But the heroine was not afraid and immediately began to use her magical power against the enemy. Grisha also rushed at him with a weapon. He asked not to use magic now, but this animal was clearly very strong, and the knights even began to worry about their master. Fear appeared in Grisha's eyes. Something clearly didn't go according to plan. Why did his magic suddenly stop working? Everyone was scared, but Fionnetta came to the rescue just in time. She used her magic against the monster in a very clear and structured manner, and the bear cub fell to the ground. Everyone was surprised by the girl's abilities. No one expected this from her. She killed the huge monster with one blow, Alfred noted. The knights even began to discuss the fact that the lady was equal to Gregory in strength. And Fionnetta suddenly started yelling at her husband, asking what he was even thinking. Why he didn't defend himself, he calmly apologized. She had one idea, and the girl suddenly grabbed Grisha by the hand. He didn't immediately understand what she was doing, but Fionnetta's guesses turned out to be true. When she held Grisha's hand, she didn't feel any magic at all. Finally, everyone returned to camp and it was already approaching evening. This day was definitely a busy one for everyone. Hugo was still worried if everything was okay with Mr. Gregory. At this time, they were in their tent, and the girl, in a serious tone with her arms folded across her chest, asked Grisha if he wanted to tell her something. He replied that it was his own fault and asked for forgiveness for letting her down, but the heroine was not talking about that. The man was upset and said that he should not have taken her with him. These words surprised and also upset Fionnetta a little. She jumped to the side. She was clearly offended and headed for the exit, saying, "As you say." Finally, she turned around and with tears in her eyes said that he didn't need to tell her anything else. She still believed that she was not a desirable spouse for Grisha. Fionnetta's body began to tremble. She cried and could not stop, and Grisha did not know how to start a dialogue with her. But he still made up his mind. He lifted the girl up and took her by the shoulder to turn her towards him. She immediately waved him off and threw his hand away from her, screaming for him not to touch her. The man asked for forgiveness again. He also asked her not to cry and offered to talk. The girl did not stop crying and said that she thought he would die and was very afraid for him. In her past life, she didn't hate him, and he didn't care about Fionnetta. He wanted to be left alone. And the heroine didn't want him to die, and she still thinks so. Grisha took some kind of bracelet off his hand and handed it to the heroine. It is an artifact that accumulates and increases magic. And now only Fionnetta thought about what happened then in the forest. The artifact usually doesn't malfunction, but it doesn't work with powerful magic, the man explained. It turns out that the artifact let him down during the hunt. Grisha confirmed these guesses and said that, as the girl had already understood, he simply had less magic. But she couldn't understand one thing, why he hid such an important detail. He sadly lowered his head and said that he did not want to appear weak in the eyes of his wife. "What nonsense!" exclaimed Fionnetta. "She asked him not to hide anything from her anymore because she wants to trust him, so she asks him to trust her too." She moved closer to him and said that they were husband and wife, and there should be no misunderstandings between them. They smiled sweetly at each other, and Fionnetta asked if he understood her well. "Yes, I understood everything," Grisha answered and began to smile even more. They sat like that for some time. Grisha decided to admit that he was sure that the heroine despised him. After all, she was forced to marry a man she didn't love, and he thought that if the girl found out that he had little magic, she would hate him even more. But she only smiled modestly and thought in her mind that she and Grisha were very similar. She gently took his hand and asked how long ago it had happened. He replied that it had happened shortly before the wedding. The girl began to ask if he knew why this happened and whether a doctor had examined him. The doctor examined him but didn't say anything specific. Maybe it was temporary, but for now he just waited and wanted to see what would happen next. Fionnetta exclaimed that she would call a doctor immediately when they returned home. She also wanted to be with him at the reception as his wife. They have the right to do this, but Grisha didn't even object. These words made the girl think. She began to think about different options of why the magic could have decreased. Last time she heard about similar incidents from the aristocrats. But horror, now she couldn't remember anything at all. But it was already quite late and time to go to bed, especially since Grisha was probably very tired. They lay down in bed and held hands. It was a very touching moment for both of them. Fionnetta noted that today Grisha lay down next to her without arguing. He replied that there was no longer any reason to avoid her since she knew about the problem. But they still held hands during the holiday, and yesterday they went to bed together, the girl said. But Grisha was simply glad that Fionnetta did not actually despise him. Their hands intertwined into an even tighter knot, and Fionnetta even began to giggle a little with joy. Grisha thought that he had said something wrong, and he added that now he simply doesn't want to let go of his wife's hand. And then the heroine thought about the fact that they didn't have their first wedding night because he was afraid to reveal his secret. She began to look closely at her husband and think that since they had discussed everything, maybe today it would happen. Maybe today they can become full-fledged spouses. But the morning came. The girl woke up unhappy because nothing happened. It seemed to her that they had shortened the distance and Grisha was worried about her, but maybe not in a romantic sense. And when she turned towards her husband, she noticed that he was no longer sleeping, but was lying down and admiring her. The girl also answered him good morning and turned away in displeasure. When he had already gotten dressed and went outside, he continued to think about the heroine. She was still like an open book. 13 years ago, as a child, Grisha's parents took him to the capital, where he met Fionnetta for the first time. She was only 4 years old then, a sweet and pretty child. Grisha was 5 years old then, and he thought it was strange that such a little girl was here alone. Today is the meeting of the 5 great houses, and he assumed that this girl was from a noble house. He approached her and asked what she was drawing. She did not answer the question, but asked who he was, and the boy introduced himself as Grisha. She also gave his name and asked if he wanted to draw with her. They had a nice time. Fionnetta drew funny faces on the ground and told Grisha that it was him. That's how they became friends. But he was still curious why Fionnetta was here alone. Without being distracted from her studies, she said that she was waiting for her mother, and Grisha realized that he had covered this in class. The woman at the head of the house is Lady Fulminena of the Tortonis, the famous lightning family, head of the firehouse. But suddenly one of the maids began to loudly call Grisha back. She came up and shouted that this girl was from the Flames house and they couldn't be friends or play together. That's right, the head of the firehouse is Mrs. Belinda, and she is Fionnetta's mother. Now everything fell into place. Fionnetta of the Flames house. And their houses are at odds, so the girl's maid also came running and took her away. 9 years ago, Grisha continued to study various information. His teachers and servants tell him not to associate with the Flames. Their families are feuding over monster hunting. And while he was looking out the window thinking about all this, he noticed that red-haired girl again. But he remembers that everyone told him not to be friends with her, but he didn't care and he ran out into the street. Meanwhile, the heroine tried to practice magic and was angry that she couldn't do it the first time. She was upset because her brother always knew how to do everything, but for some reason she couldn't do it. At this time, Grisha was hiding behind a tree and watching the girl. He wanted to help her, but he remembered that she was one of the Flames, and if he approached, she would definitely get scared. But he came up with something. While Fionnetta did not understand what she was doing wrong, he quickly wrote a hint on a piece of paper. This letter flew in and stopped not far from the girl's feet. She, of course, noticed it right away. There were written tips on magic. But who could have thrown them there, since there was no one nearby at all? But suddenly she exclaimed joyfully, because she decided that it could be a spirit. She also joyfully screamed and waved her arms, thanking the spirit for his help, and Grisha stood behind the tree and laughed. While they were in the capital, Grisha sent Fionnetta letters and gave her advice on accounting, and she always thought that the spirit was helping her. In gratitude, she left him sweets and trinkets. And now let's move on to the events of 3 years ago. Since then, Grisha has never been to the capital and has not seen Fionnetta. He was interested in whether she could do magic. The guy was too excited before the trip. And while he was just standing there talking with his comrades, he heard someone behind him greet Mrs. Fionnetta. He turned around and saw in front of him a beautiful girl who had been stuck in his head for a very long time. One of the guests noticed that Grisha couldn't take his eyes off the girl and made a remark to him. It was Aulus Vinch, a member of the Windhouse family. Now they began to look at Fionnetta and noted that she had become a beauty. Aulus immediately shouted that Grisha had apparently fallen in love with her, but he said that it wasn't true. He just hadn't seen her for a long time, and she had become very beautiful. But nevertheless, Grisha simply could not take his eyes off the heroine and constantly looked for her with his eyes in the hall. He understood that things were bad because he couldn't get Fionnetta out of his head. And then the Crown Prince approached him with the question of whether he still couldn't forget Fionnetta, since he was turning down all potential brides. But Grisha couldn't admit this and replied that he simply hadn't found a suitable match yet. The Crown Prince, of course, did not believe it. He had long suspected his feelings for the girl from the Flames. And when he asked Grigory if he liked Fionnetta, he suddenly realized that he could even say that he loved this girl. His friend noted that they had known each other for a long time, but he had never seen Grisha so puzzled. He noted with a smile that this was clearly because of Fionnetta. It was true. The hero stood rooted to the spot and understood that he was constantly thinking about this girl. He began to realize that this was happening because he loved her, and even began to be afraid of this feeling. But he hadn't admitted it to himself yet, because he wasn't sure he had never felt this way about anyone. The blonde understood everything from his reaction and offered to help them improve their relationship. Grisha replied that he would gladly agree, but unfortunately their families have been in conflict for a long time, and they simply cannot communicate. But Prince Oswald insisted that one should listen only to one's heart, and not to the prejudices of one's family. The hero decided to pretend that he simply didn't hear him, because he is the future eye of the Eidzov house, and he cannot help but take into account the interests of the family when choosing a wife. Meanwhile, the celebration was in full swing. People were dancing and having fun. Grisha caught Fionnetta's eye again and couldn't tear himself away, but this time it seemed she also noticed the man. He understood that if he continued to constantly look at her, then soon everyone else might notice it too. Behind him, people began to whisper about who would become the Marquise's bride. But these rumors and assumptions only angered him. Grisha simply rolled his eyes and did not want to listen to anything. Confused by his thoughts, he went out onto the balcony. "What am I doing?" thought Grisha, lowering his head. Because of the difficult relations between the houses, he refused the prince's tempting offer of gradual rapprochement. Her scarlet hair was still beautiful, and Grisha couldn't take his eyes off Fionnetta for a minute throughout the entire evening. And here are the events of a year ago. The prince, as usual, was lying and thinking about life. He suddenly called the hero by name. He asked him if he was not going to do anything, but he did not understand what he was talking about. The prince was talking about Fionnetta. He asked how long Grisha was going to just stare at her, because the girl had already reached marriageable age, and if nothing was done, she would definitely be taken away. Grisha didn't even want to imagine that she might soon marry someone else. "I just imagined it and already got angry. It's scary to imagine what will happen to him if the heroine really marries someone else." The prince said that he had some kind of gift for Grisha for his honesty, and in the future he may regret if he doesn't use it. Yesterday, a letter arrived from the royal palace for Bastian Ides, the head of the Ides house. Grisha immediately thought about it and decided that because of this letter, his father was urgently calling him to see him. He was in a bad mood, but what was in that letter is still unclear. In order to overcome the differences between their house and the Flames' house, Grisha must marry their daughter. This information was given to him by his father. However, the father was going to reject the offer. By agreeing to this offer, they would only play into the hands of their enemies. And only now Grisha thought that apparently this was that very gift from Oswald. He understood that this was his chance and he couldn't give up, so he proudly declared that he wanted to accept this offer. Of course, Bastian was furious and started yelling at his son, because he understood perfectly well that he and the Flames were the worst enemies. But they also have hated each other for many years, and Grisha said that it was time to stop ignoring the problem. Old grievances should be left in the past. It is time to reconsider the relationship between families, and since His Majesty has ordered it, it is time to act. Grisha stated that if his father refused the offer, he himself would refuse the inheritance. Father didn't believe that all this was for the sake of kinship with the Flames, but Grisha confirmed it. Bastian calmed down and realized that if he refused, his son would simply not forgive him. At this point, the conversation ended. Bastian added that he would soon write a response to His Majesty. Since his son so wants to marry the Flames' daughter and is ready to give up the title of future head of the house for this, he intends to meet him halfway. Grisha was surprised and pleasantly shocked. He simply said a big thank you to his father for his approval, and since he was able to convince his father, he and Fionnetta could definitely be together. Bastian walked down the hallway and wondered if his son really loved the Flames' daughter that much. Grisha knows perfectly well why their families are in conflict, and still he was able to fall in love with this girl. So Grisha, with his father's consent, became engaged to Fionnetta. It took a lot of time to prepare for the wedding, and then something terrible happened. During a monster hunt, the head of House Ides, Bastian Ides, died. Because of this, the wedding had to be held earlier. And now this same man stands engaged to his love and cannot hide his smile. After the death of the father, the wedding was postponed. Neither the Ideses nor the Flames wanted to rush, but no one dared to go against the will of the king. Grisha was always sure that she didn't want to marry him, but recently her attitude had somehow changed. However, we should not forget that he married Fionnetta thanks to his connections. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by Alfer's voice. He ran up to the girl and began to apologize for his inappropriate behavior. He said that since she arrived, she was worthy of fulfilling the duties of the mistress of the house. And he was prejudiced against the heroine because of her origin. He behaved stupidly and changed his mind. It was very strange that he changed his mind so suddenly. It caused some doubt in the girl. Falling to his knees, he began to beg for forgiveness and said that he understood all her discontent. He also admired her mastery of magic, and he was grateful that Fionnetta saved Lord Grigory. He would understand if the heroine despised him, but still, Alfer wanted to thank her with all his heart for saving him. But Fionnetta never said that she despised him. She also wanted to thank him for fighting shoulder to shoulder with her husband. These words caused Alfer to be surprised, and he raised his head. The guy was very ashamed of the fact that he had behaved impolitely, and now promises to faithfully serve Mrs. Fionnetta. Now she can do with him whatever she wants. But the girl replied that she would not do anything with him, and the knight standing nearby smiled and said that she was a terrible woman. Grisha watched all this from the sidelines and was pleased that even his army finally recognized Fionnetta as a worthy wife of the Marquis. When they returned home, the girl, as promised, called the doctor, but he began to shout that in such a state it was generally forbidden to use strong magic. Grisha was currently weakened, there was no threat to his life, but if this continued, it would be difficult for him to fulfill his duties as the head of the family. Some househeads were stripped of their titles because they could no longer use magic to its full potential. Something had to be done, and Fionnetta declared that she would take on the duties and affairs related to magic until her husband recovered. The doctor was worried that they wouldn't be able to hide the problem forever, so it was important to start treating him immediately. The girl asked if the doctor had any medicine, and he answered yes. To cure magical exhaustion, it is necessary to perform a magical exchange. To do this, he asked the heroine to exchange magic with Mr. Gregory. After these words, he said that it would be better to leave them alone, so as not to interfere. It is believed that exchanging magical powers will help in recovery. It is customary to exchange magic with a lover or a spouse when exchanging magic. A strong attachment is needed. The girl was pleased with such thoughts. It seemed that with the help of such a ritual, they would definitely become closer to each other, but then Grisha said that he would not force her if she herself did not want to. The girl was even outraged by such words and shouted that she didn't say such a thing, it's time to start. They crossed their hands on their knees, and from there, the most powerful magic immediately began to emanate, filling the entire room with its light. Fionnetta immediately felt the tension. It was not the easiest task, which also required strength and energy. She was very pleased with how Grisha's magic spread throughout her body, which is probably why her loved one was taking part in the ritual, she thought. They sat like that for some time until all of each other's magic changed places. But suddenly the heroine asked Grisha why he wasn't holding her hand. He didn't understand why she was asking this, but the girl shouted at him to answer the question immediately. The hero sadly replied that he did not do this because she was not 18 years old. He added that people say that if you touch a girl before she is 18, she will have a very hard time giving birth. She couldn't believe that this was the reason he didn't hold her hand, and now she remembered that he approached her just after her birthday. However, at that moment the girl was in despair. She was sure that Grisha despised her. But what could have happened if she hadn't pushed him away at that moment? Fionnetta fell face down on the bed and, burying her face in her hands, began to cry. She said that no one believed in this superstition for a long time, and she didn't know that he took it so seriously. And then turning to him, she said that she didn't mind. Grisha asked again if she was sure of her words, because the king forced them to get married, and it was not the girl's desire. But if Grisha was disgusting to her, then she definitely would not have helped him with the exchange of magic. She stood up and sat down next to her husband, and the room fell into dead silence. The heroine gently took his hand herself and asked if he would run away again. And then she put her hand on his face and stretched her lips to finally kiss him. "Excuse me, sir." Hugo burst into the room unexpectedly for both of them. He brought the letter, but immediately became embarrassed and began to apologize for disturbing the couple. It was a letter of invitation from the Crown Prince, and Fionnetta was simply beside herself with the awkwardness of the whole situation. It was written that Prince Oswald wanted Grisha to arrive in the capital as soon as possible. The girl thought that this definitely didn't happen in her past life. I wonder what the prince wants to talk to Gregory about. Meanwhile, he himself was sitting in his estate and playing chess. Grisha and Fionnetta arrived in the capital of Rouvert. All the people immediately recognized that it was the Ides family, and they were invited to the ball together. It was unexpected. The ladies said there were rumors that the couple had a tense relationship, but now they looked like a happy couple. It seemed to Fionnetta herself that she and Grisha had become much closer lately. In the past, she always attended such events alone, but now the girl was happy that they were together, but it was not the time to fly in the clouds. After all, they had a conversation with the Crown Prince ahead of them. The first thing he asked was if they had heard about what had happened in the capital. Recently, there have been more and more cases of weakening magic in aristocratic families. Fionnetta immediately realized that Grisha had the same illness and became wary. But the man immediately admitted that he had actually encountered this himself some time ago. "It can't be," Oswald shouted. He was surprised and scared at the same time. He asked why Grisha hadn't told him about this before. The prince began to ask when and how it began, but was very upset that Grisha hid it from him. This happened shortly before arriving in the capital, the hero answered. The prince asked if this prevented him from performing his official duties, since it was difficult to hunt magical monsters in such a situation. The prince offered to send his knights to help him, but he replied that there was no point in doing that, since he already had an assistant. Fionnetta confirmed and asked His Highness not to worry, as she, as the Marquise's wife, would give him her full support. The prince liked this answer. He smiled and replied that he was very happy with this arrangement. And passing by Grisha, he whispered in his ear that he was very glad that they got along with Fionnetta, and also congratulated him. Oswald asked to inform him immediately if anything changed, and the heroine stood thoughtfully as she tried to understand what this illness was connected with. The girl suddenly heard someone calling her by her last name, AIDS. It was her mother, the head of the Flames house, Belinda. She said that they had not seen each other for a long time. Standing next to her was the son of the head of the Flames house, and also Fionnetta's brother, White, who also said with a smile that he was glad to see the Aidsies. All the girls at the party whispered that Mr. White was as handsome as ever. He had recently taken over the hunt for monsters, and the Flames house was protecting them. The 5 great houses are different from other aristocratic families. The royal family entrusted them with lands teeming with monster nests. Therefore, the 5 great families are responsible for protecting their lands from the attacks of monsters, and the people respect them for their contribution to the defense of the country. In her past life, Fionnetta not only couldn't cope with the monsters, but she also ruined her relationship with her husband. It was not for nothing that she was then called a useless wife. The girl bowed respectfully and told her mother and brother that she missed them. Grisha also respectfully greeted her family. Belinda said there were rumors that her daughter was doing quite well in the Ides household. The heroine confirmed with a modest smile that this was true. Grisha added that his wife became his support during the hunt for monsters, and he admired the Flames' school of magic. The girl didn't quite understand why he was praising her to her mother. White added that he used to think that Northerners were quite closed, but apparently he was wrong, and he is glad that everything is going well for his sister. Meanwhile, the butler was serving wine to the guests and offered a glass to Gregory. Fionnetta's brother said that she used to always get along well with knights and only thought about hunting monsters, but now she has become the beautiful Marquise of Joma Aids. He noticed that the couple got along well and asked if his sister had fallen in love with Marquis Gregory. The girl asked not to start and not to make fun of her like before. But he didn't stop and said that apparently she really liked Grisha, since she didn't even want to answer. He thought the couple was very cute, and also saw that Grisha was happy to be with Fionnetta. They turned towards Grisha, and White noticed that he was apparently also very worried, since he was drinking so much wine. She asked her brother for forgiveness, and went to her husband. Why would he suddenly start drinking wine? They had certain plans after all. Fionnetta was already approaching her husband and called him by name. He asked if Fionnetta had finished talking to her brother. She confirmed this, but was clearly unhappy with the hero's behavior. And suddenly a beautiful melody began to play, and people around began to dance. Grisha put his glass on the table, his cheeks turned red, and he extended his hand to the girl, inviting her to dance. Fionnetta did not refuse, and at that moment the gaze of all those present was directed only at them. They were indeed a very beautiful couple, and what's more, they danced together just as well. His embrace became tighter compared to how they danced in the past. But the heroine also noticed that Grisha now had some kind of feverish look. The girl was shy, but she was very pleased to be near him and to be in his arms. But because of his look, she even began to think that Grisha had drunk a lot of wine, and that he was probably just drunk at that moment. Fionnetta asked him to stop and rest a little. They left the hall, and White kept an eye on them. Grisha sat down on the sofa, and Fionnetta asked what he was doing here. She had never seen him behave like that before. She said that her brother had invited her to dance, so she would go back to the hall, and suggested that Grisha take a rest. But suddenly he grabbed the girl by the hand and pulled her towards him. From such abruptness, she began to fall onto the sofa, and Grisha hung over her like an eagle. The girl was a little scared and did not understand what was happening. The man asked her to dance only with him from now on, after which he immediately pulled the heroine's face towards himself, and their lips touched. She certainly didn't expect this. Fionnetta's eyes even widened in surprise, and she didn't understand what to do. They had never been so close before, and now the heroine did not understand how to behave. She remembered her brother's words that they were so sweet and so happy being around each other, and she calls him so affectionately by name, Grisha. Why did she remember her brother now? She thought that by doing so, she had ruined everything. The man asked her again what she called him, but she immediately began to apologize and said that she didn't mean to call him that. But he grabbed her hair and pulled her towards him, saying that he liked the way she called him. She agreed, but was still a little frightened by her husband's behavior. He was clearly delighted and kissed the girl on the head. It was wonderful that he behaved so tenderly, but Fionnetta was afraid that her heart would break from excitement. Grisha said that he would also like to call her something affectionate. Fionn, he began to repeat her name endlessly. The girl moved away a little and asked how long he was going to call her. He approached the heroine again and wanted to say something, but suddenly he just fell on her lap and fell asleep. The girl began to try to break free, but the man was quite heavy. She tried to wake him up somehow, but all attempts were useless. He fell asleep quite soundly, and now Fionnetta was even a little upset that he fell asleep at such a moment. She sighed heavily but decided not to disturb him and just let him rest. The girl handed Grisha over to the knights, who promised to look after him, and she went to the ballroom. When she went there, she accidentally overheard the guests talking. They discussed the fact that part of the aristocracy had lost their powers and could now not attend the ball. It was degrading to the dignity of a proud aristocrat, and they were sorry that a member of the royalist faction was included in this number. Fionnetta realized that this loudest man was the Duke of Rassavan, Mr. Brown. He is the head of the Crown Prince's faction, and there are also influential aristocrats around him. She didn't want to talk to them and thought about quietly passing by, but she heard that they began to discuss that the first prince was thirsty for the people's attention. He takes an active part in charity work. Since he does not possess light magic, he looks for other ways to attract people to his side. But the men said that no matter how hard he tried, he would not succeed in luring the aristocrats. The Rassavan family has a long history, and they have a penchant for light magic. The first prince, who does not have the characteristic features of the royal family, has a bad reputation. Fionnetta would not have paid attention, but after the wedding there were also bad rumors about her, which she hated. The maids whispered that they did not much like serving the Flames girl. They hoped that she would not cause problems. And now she heard one of the men also say that it was better for the first prince not to cause trouble without light magic. What a disgusting thing, the girl thought. She couldn't remain silent here. She approached the men and asked permission to join their conversation. She thought the discussion was getting more and more heated, so she said she wanted to join in. They began to deny it, saying that they were simply discussing business and that their conversation had nothing to do with hunting monsters and the 5 great houses. Mr. Brown asked to stop and not to be rude to the young lady. He asked if it seemed to him that the first prince had recently visited their house. He said that he understood how difficult it was to receive high-ranking guests, and she had just arrived at Ides's house. The man asked if it had been difficult for her then. The heroine smiled sweetly and said that everything was fine and she had already learned a lot. No one thought that Fionnetta would take the side of His Highness. They also noted that the girl became very close to the first prince, although he does not possess royal magic, but he has a pretty face. They started talking to the girl in a bad manner, asking if she liked the first prince. It was quite rude of them, but they continued to say that no matter how handsome he was, the crown prince was superior to him, and the men asked if maybe she liked him. She politely replied that she had heard their advice, but thought that if her brother had been there, he would not have tolerated such a thing. And then her face changed, and Fionnetta loudly answered that she herself would decide with whom she would communicate. Everyone looked at her with caution, but one of them said that the girl was being deceived by the identity of the first prince. He also added that Marquis Ides would be upset when he found out what his new wife was saying. A fire lit up in the girl's eyes. She was clearly angry and answered seriously that no one should dare insult her husband. Otherwise, she might think that they are declaring war on the Ides family. But suddenly the girl heard someone's voice behind her, who said that they were apparently having a good time here. Turning around, she saw an attractive, dark-haired man with green eyes in front of her. It was the first prince, and everyone suddenly began to say how glad they were to see the young man. They said they were very lucky to meet him today, but it all looked very two-faced in the eyes of the heroine. The first prince smiled and said that in that case he would be glad to join their conversation. Mr. Brown immediately replied that their conversation did not deserve his attention. The first prince continued to smile and said that in that case he would not like the rumors they had spread in Lady Aids's ears. Brown bowed and said that there was no hurry to leave them. He was clearly embarrassed by his words. Everyone else joined him and also quickly hurried out of the hall. The guy turned to Fionnetta and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The girl bowed respectfully and reciprocated. After she and the Marquise had retired to the room, she went out alone, leaving Grisha to rest. The first prince reflected that he never thought he would be drawn into a dispute with the loyalists. There are many people from the Crown Prince's faction who worship light magic at the festival, and they take advantage of it and spread rumors left and right. And Fionnetta, in turn, went out of her way to put them in their place. The Marquise had no advantage in arguing with them. He said that these aristocrats always loved to quarrel, and no matter what he did, they would always be unhappy. The girl suggested simply ignoring them, since the first prince had many admirers. Even Fionnetta herself admires him. But the rumors were still very strong. Everyone whispered that they felt sorry for him. But if the first prince had light hair, it would be better. He was of no use at all. The guy was surprised that Marquise Ides didn't pay attention to his hair color and lack of light magic. He didn't understand why she didn't care about it. It was very unusual and made him very happy. He was pleased to hear this, and Fionnetta was even surprised that the first prince could smile. Suddenly, he asked the heroine where Mr. Ides had gone. She replied that she was just feeling unwell, but the knights were looking after him. And now Fionnetta was about to return to the ballroom alone. He extended his hand to the girl and asked if Fionnetta would allow him to dance with her. The girl thought, and before her eyes was Grisha's face, who asked her to dance only with him, and she could not disobey her husband. She thanked the prince for the invitation, but said that she would not agree to dance with anyone except her husband. Therefore, after such an answer, he asked the heroine for permission to just talk to her and promised to protect her from the annoying company. The girl bowed and happily accepted the offer. They went into the hall, and the prince began to say that he had seen him and the Marquis dancing together and that they looked wonderful. "Of course we are husband and wife," Fionnetta answered modestly. She was glad that even from the outside it was clear that they were finally getting along with each other. The prince extended his glass towards the girl and said that now was the time to talk frankly. The last time the Marquis was looming over them, so the prince assumed that the girl could not speak openly, but this time he offered to contact him if she needed help. Fionnetta asked what he wanted to know. He thought that people from different camps would not find a common language. Fionnetta's husband was from the Ides house, and they somehow found a common language, which was strange for the first prince. He was right. The Ideses and the Flames have been feuding for a long time, but Fionnetta and her husband have built a good relationship. The prince noted that it was quite difficult, but the girl said that they were trying their best to resolve the conflict between their families. The guy smiled and said he would look forward to the results. Marquise Ides alone cannot cope with the settlement of the conflict between the families, and he was gladly ready to watch the spark of hope in her eyes go out. Suddenly, someone's voice was heard apologizing for distracting them from their conversation. It was Prince Oswald who was approaching the conversation. He asked his brother why he decided to talk to Fionnetta. It was clear from the first prince's face that he was not too happy to see Oswald, after which his face changed dramatically, and he said with a smile that they were just chatting with the Marquise about different things. Oswald asked permission if he could join the conversation and asked the topic. The first prince immediately replied that they were just talking about hunting monsters. He added that the Crown Prince himself knows very well that the lands were given to the 5 great families by royal decree. After these words, he took his glass and said that he would leave them and headed towards the exit. "A busy man," Prince Oswald noted with a smile and looking at his brother. But then Fionnetta's brother entered the conversation and explained that the schools of magic of the houses of Ides and Flames are very different. The living conditions on the lands are also radically different. The girl noted recently she had learned a lot about monsters. Prince Oswald noticed that the girl was very diligent and well-mannered, and she was pleased to hear that. He asked if the girl would take part in the meeting of the 5 great families. She answered positively. She used to come with her mother, and now she is a little worried. But there was still time before autumn, and she could have time to prepare mentally. And then the prince asked where Grisha had gone. White immediately put in his 2 cents and said that he left the Marchioness alone at the party. Fionnetta thought and did not know what to answer. She thought only about their kiss. But she told the prince that Grisha was simply not feeling well, and he became a little wary and asked if anything serious had happened to him. Fionnetta admitted that he was fine after all and that he had simply had too much wine. This even amused Oswald a little. He joked that when he saw Fionnetta's beauty, it was hard for him to be around her, but the girl asked him to stop joking. And when it got dark, they were already riding back to their palace together, and the heroine did not understand how it was possible to sleep for so long. Grisha opened his eyes, and it felt very good to lie on his wife's lap. But suddenly a realization came to him, and he suddenly jumped up and tried to sit up. Fionnetta discontentedly told him to go back to sleep, and added that he got drunk and fell asleep almost at the beginning of the evening. It's good that she was nearby. She asked Grisha not to do this again, and the man began to apologize to her. He was terribly ashamed. Turning away from the window, she replied that he didn't need to apologize because they should always support each other in difficult times. She was glad that her husband had opened up to her from a different side, and she remembered their kiss and conversation the whole way. Seeing the heroine's thoughtful look, Grisha asked if anything had happened. This question surprised her greatly. How could he ask such a thing? Of course it happened. Doesn't he remember anything, not even their first kiss? Grisha just lay there and tried to understand what he had done, and Fionnetta was simply furious and said that in that case there was no need to remember anything. The Marquise fell asleep again, and they rode to the palace in silence all the way. In their past life, they didn't communicate like this, but Fionnetta was still pleased that the distance between them was decreasing. When she first heard that she was to marry the Marquise, she was simply horrified and did not understand why this was necessary. The maid explained to her that the family simply had no other choice, and Fionnetta will have to make a huge effort to improve her relationship with the Marquis of Ides. She did not agree at the time and planned to put a spoke in the Marquise's wheel. When she had already begun living in the Aidsov house, the butler repeatedly reported to Grigori that the Marquise Fionnetta was causing inconvenience. She does not fulfill her duties as a housewife, but Grisha still asked not to pay attention to all this. The girl was sad for a long time and could not believe that Grigori had been ignoring her for so long. Apparently, he really didn't need her. And when they somehow accidentally met in the corridor, she loudly called out to her husband. He stopped and asked what happened. Fionnetta wanted to talk and, gathering her strength, asked why he had never reproached her before. The man pretended not to understand what was being discussed. Then she asked whether he had been informed that she was not fulfilling her duties as the mistress of the house. All she did all this time was spend the Aides family's money. But unfortunately, Grisha also responded to this by telling her to do whatever she wanted. He added that he had no intention of interfering in her personal affairs. The girl became even more angry and decided that since he said so, she would actually do whatever she wanted. And as she left, she added that Grigory would regret this. And now they are driving home together after the event. Grisha is lying on her lap, and just a couple of hours ago he was kissing her so tenderly. After the wedding, Fionnetta was in despair. She was lonely, her heart was broken. But Grisha was so pleased with the opportunity to call his wife affectionately that she immediately forgot all the grievances. Now she understood that she shouldn't have been so stubborn and continued to admire her husband sleeping on her lap. A few days earlier, the butler came to Grisha and said that he was right. Here and in the estate in the capital, the Flames family is treated with disdain by many servants. And it's good that they started preparing in advance. Until now they had treated the lady badly. The man was upset. He needed to deal with the servants immediately. He had trusted their prudence in vain. The butler understood, but now he wanted to communicate something important. The maid reprimanded Fionnetta for mixing up the cutlery at the table. But the girl didn't react much to their conversations and just sat there thoughtfully. The servants whispered that something had happened to the mistress, that she had not been herself lately. But then Hout approached the heroine and asked her to look at something she had chosen. She asked what Mr. Grigory would like best and showed her several options for peignoirs. Looking at these outfits, Fionnetta was shocked that the maid was offering her such a thing. She asked what these shameless outfits were, but Hope replied with a smile that the Marquis would definitely like them. The maid noticed that after the party the couple became clearly closer. Fionnetta wanted to object, but decided to remain silent. It didn't matter, and the heroine said that she would give Hope a task while she herself was in the capital. The girl immediately asked what she would need to do. She asked the maid to find out if any magical creatures had appeared in the capital. But if the creatures had gotten to the capital, then everyone would have been talking about it for a long time. But she still promised to find out. Fionnetta noticed that Hope was thinking about it too. The royal family protects the capital with light magic. Magical creatures cannot enter it. However, the heroine came to the conclusion that there is nothing absolute in the world. In addition, Hope was an expert at finding the hidden. The girl bowed politely and promised to do everything in her power. The heroine constantly thought about the fact that the prince asked to find out the cause of the disease. First, it was necessary to restore Grisha's magic. The exchange of magic helped a little. It is necessary to repeat the procedure to achieve results, but they have only just begun. She wondered if there might be another way to share magic. If she had to experience this moment again, Fionnetta's heart wouldn't be able to take it. And while they have no evidence, they need to go and study this issue. But she was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice how Grisha came up to her, and they were so close again. The girl suddenly turned away sharply and began to quickly run in the opposite direction. The man did not understand what was happening. He wondered if he had done something terrible while drunk. She ran at such a speed that even the maids standing nearby had their hair standing on end from the wind. The girl did not understand why she felt calm in the carriage, but now she was so worried. She was now even ashamed to look Grisha in the eyes. The man was simply beside himself and could not understand why his wife began to behave so strangely. He turned to the knights for advice. Hugo also noticed that after arriving in the capital, the lady became overly thoughtful. The butler noted that she had a lot to do at home, and he thought that here she would take a rest from all this. It was obvious to Alfred that the heroine began to behave strangely after that very ball. It was the lady's first ball after marriage, and the gentleman had been drinking too much that evening. Perhaps she was simply upset. And only now he realized that he probably did something at that moment when he was not aware of it. But the thing is that he does not remember anything. But then Grisha really did get drunk to the point of unconsciousness. The butler couldn't even believe his eyes when the knights carried him into the house. It was such a disgrace, and everyone came to the conclusion that the lady was upset because of her husband's behavior. Alfred approached Grisha and began to speak. He said that the Marquis had behaved terribly. He had gotten drunk and left his wife alone at the ball, so he definitely should apologize to her. Alfred gave him one piece of advice if he didn't mind. And after some time, Grisha was already standing near Fionetta's room. He was worried, but there was no choice. The man asked to talk to her, but the heroine coldly replied that she was busy and was about to close the door. But Grisha didn't let her do this. He grabbed the girl by the hand and asked for forgiveness. Fionetta was surprised and asked what he was apologizing for. He was sure that he had done something wrong and asked for forgiveness for offending her. He asked her not to avoid him anymore. Fionetta began to smile. She understood that she could not run away from her husband forever. She also apologized for her behavior and said that he had actually done nothing wrong. In fact, the advice that Alfred gave to Grigory was to invite his wife on a date. That's what he did. Grisha suggested that Fionetta spend the next day together.